Chapter 1081. The Land of Order was a special planet at the end of the high-dimensional universe. It was also one of the few planets that had been forcibly created through power. Unlike most ordinary planets, it was just like its name. It completely represented the absolute power of order. Whether it was the buildings that looked exactly the same, with almost no difference at all, or the symmetrical decorations that would make people with obsessive-compulsive disorder happy. Most importantly, the animals, plants, and parasites were all evolving in an extremely orderly cycle. Here, there were no so-called accidents, nor were there any mutations that were often mentioned in biology. Everything was under control. Even though it sounded like this place was so bad that it was beyond the limits of what most people on Earth could endure, only intelligent life forms who had personally come here would personally experience the perfection of absolute order. Of course, as a failure, the initiator had not been doing well recently. First, he had been mercilessly mocked by his enemies. Then he had to do many humiliating punishment missions. However, as the punishment period ended, he had returned to his normal position. He continued to stay in the council as a ruler, waiting for an opportunity. His partner, in particular, had already won the trust and respect of many council members through that intelligent brain of his. He believed that it would not be long before he would be able to uncover the secret of the ruler's immortality. When that time came, before the initiator could fantasize about the final success of his plan, there was suddenly a slight energy fluctuation in the room, although it was very faint, and anyone who was slightly further away would subconsciously ignore it. The next second, a small crack opened out of thin air, and two creatures, one big and one small, walked out. One of them was the insect-like Gru, and the other was his friend, the ruler who looked like a little fairy. "You are Chaos." The initiator's pupils contracted abruptly, and he immediately became extremely vigilant. He was not like Zhang Cheng, who was completely in the dark after entering this domain. He quickly obtained a lot of information through various means, the most important of which was information on the various rulers. After all, only 32 rulers had been born since the birth of the universe. Excluding the two newcomers, many of the remaining rulers were ancient enough to compete with the lifespans of stars. In such a small circle, it was not easy to maintain a sense of mystery. Through constant probing and switching sides, the other rulers were already familiar with the appearances and abilities of most of the rulers. Yes, I am Gru from the Chaos faction. Nice to meet you." Gru took the initiative to introduce himself in a friendly manner. In contrast, the other little fairy's attitude was much worse. She grinned menacingly and threatened, "Newbie, I advise you to hand over what we want, or else." "What else do you want to do?" the initiator asked in a meaningful manner. "Don't tell me you dare to fight here." After all, this was the Order Parliament, a world controlled by the absolute power of order. There wasn't a single bit of chaos law to speak of. Needless to say, there were two members of the council. "Maybe I can't beat you in a head-on fight, but I can hold on until help arrives." "Very good. I'm starting to admire your courage. If that's the case, then shut up. Let me do it, if you don't want to mess things up." Before the little fairy could finish speaking, Gru stood out and reprimanded her in a low voice. Although the former was a little unwilling, he didn't choose to cause trouble in the end. With a swoosh, he drilled into the space crack and disappeared without a trace. What a bluff. The initiator smiled disdainfully as he stared at the crack that was gradually closing. Then he asked Gru, who was in the form of a large bug, "Then, respected Chaos Lord, what is your motive for infiltrating the Land of Order in such a way? As I said, I only wanted to talk to you about souls. I'm curious, are you really planning to combine with your other self? Otherwise, why would you choose to cut off a part of his soul from the very beginning?" Gru asked the question that he wanted to know the answer to the most. The initiator couldn't help but frown when he heard this. He asked softly, "What do you know?" "A lot, almost everything. I even saw you take away the soul fragment hidden in the young girl's body with my own eyes. It looked so beautiful, deep, dark, and pure. It was hard not to notice." Gru didn't try to hide anything. Instead, He told the initiator everything that he knew. You wanted that time node? The initiator wasn't a fool. He immediately figured out how Gru saw through his secret. He couldn't believe that his other self would tell such a thing to an outsider. If Gru had any ill intentions, it might cause an unimaginable shock that might even affect his current self. Gru seemed to have sensed the initiator's thoughts. He explained casually, "Time node? No, I went through all of his experiences growing up. I have to say that you raised him very well. You even awakened the dormant darkness in his body. You turned a harmless person into a monster that was a mix of madness, darkness, and evil." Ha ha ha. You also think that he's a monster? Looks like we've reached a consensus. Regrettably, I won't take out that soul fragment. The initiator rejected directly. Hand over Zhang Cheng's soul fragment? What a joke. He would rather hand over a pile of precious knowledge and techniques than hand over the soul fragment. With the soul fragment, he could carry out his grand plan. Otherwise, everything would be a pipe dream. Don't be in such a hurry to reject. You have to understand that we're not your enemies. We're not spying on you or stopping you from doing anything. On the contrary, we're willing to help you in the dark. Gru calmly stated his conditions. Now, this beetle-like ruler's heart was filled with intense curiosity. He only wanted to take another look at the soul fragment that belonged to Zhang Cheng, so that he could confirm whether that crazy plan of his had any chance of success. I'm sorry, but I don't need help. I won't hand over the soul fragment. You should give up on that idea. Also, if it's convenient, help me pass a message to my other self. Tell him that I'll appear in front of him in another life form in the near future. I hope he'll be prepared. Chapter 1082. Another form. Gru's pupils contracted as he questioned sternly. You're actually researching such a taboo? Taboo? No, that's not taboo. It's the supreme truth of the universe. It's the truth hidden behind the fog. Since the birth of the universe, no intelligence has touched upon this domain. I will be the first and also the only. As he spoke, the initiator raised his chin slightly. Unlike his usual low-key and gentle appearance, he gave off a fanaticism that made one tremble in fear. At this moment, he looked no different from Zhang Cheng when he was in a state of madness. They were both madmen who did not care about the consequences in order to achieve their goals. As he watched this familiar scene, Gru finally realized why the two of them had completed their self-transcendence and become rulers at almost the same time, and why they had maintained such a strange and awkward relationship. The answer was very simple. They were like two sides of a coin. Even though they gave off the impression that their personalities were completely different, there was an indescribably strong will hidden in their bones. There was nothing that could stop this will from advancing, or else it would be crushed alive. After a long silence, Gru sighed softly and said with a slightly rueful voice, "Do you know? Before you, there was a ruler who attempted something similar, but he failed in the end. To be more precise, not only did he fail, but he also brought about catastrophic consequences. At least 30 large star systems were destroyed, and the originally stable laws underwent a series of uncertain changes. No one knows if these changes are good or bad, but they've caused us problems that continue to this day. I guarantee that if the other rulers learn of this, they'll definitely abandon their factional struggles and imprison you for eternity, because you've threatened the safety of the entire universe. Oof. You old fellows who have lived for who knows how long have long lost the motivation to improve, the courage to touch upon the truth. You're afraid of failure and death. But I'm different. I'll continue to advance until the day I collapse on the path forward. The path of knowledge and power has no end, just like the entire universe. Once I succeed, infinity will no longer be an exaggeration, but a reality. The initiator did not hide his grand plan. Even though he was still so weak among the sovereigns that most sovereigns could easily defeat and imprison him in a one-on-one battle, he was still a sovereign. However, the flames of ambition that burned fiercely in his heart caused Gru to feel fear and trepidation. It was as if he was facing a monster that was dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than himself. After staring at each other for a while, Gru finally gave up on his next plan. He summoned his companions and disappeared without a trace. After confirming that the two of them had left completely and would not appear again, the initiator relaxed his tense nerves and returned to his usual calm appearance. He touched his chin and muttered to himself, "I didn't expect that someone would notice what I was doing. It seems that the plan must be sped up." Just as he finished speaking, he immediately walked towards the place where his old friend's research institute was located, ready to discuss countermeasures with the opposite party and see what countermeasures the brain, known as the smartest in the universe, could come up with. Gru, who had left the Order Council, had already returned to the mysterious scroll that extended endlessly. He stood there with a pensive expression. When the other sovereign noticed this, she could not help but ask, "What did you talk to him about?" "A lot, but it's best if you don't know. Otherwise, it'll be troublesome if you're implicated," Gru said half-heartedly. "Implicated? You make it sound like I'm not implicated." The sovereign, who looked like a fairy, rolled her eyes in annoyance. However, it was not hard to tell from her casual attitude that she was not very interested in this matter and did not continue to ask. "No, it's not the same. Trust me, don't get involved. I feel that it won't be long before an unimaginable chaos and disaster befalls us." "Hi, my friend. You've never been involved in such matters anyway." With that, Gru ignored the other's protests and quickly tore open a crack and entered. At the same time, on a planet located in a remote corner of the universe, Zhang Cheng was sitting on a chair, looking at the images transmitted by the magic mirror with great interest. He was completely unaware that a huge shadow had once again enveloped his head. In the kingdom's palace, more than 10 knights and nobles were in a tense standoff with the monsters and steel puppets led by Princess Vilya. The king roared furiously, "Damn it! Do you know what you're doing? You're my most beloved daughter. I've given you all my love and care. But in the end, you've chosen to betray me and try to take the crown from me." "No, father. I'm not doing this to take the crown. I'm doing this to save you, to save this country. You don't know who our enemy is, and you don't understand how terrifying that absolute power is. Surrender. I promise that I won't hurt anyone as long as you hand over your power," the princess persuaded earnestly. To be honest, the night before she chose to start the coup, her mind was filled with pain and struggle. There were many times when she wanted to give up, but she held it in at the last moment. If there was anyone in this country who didn't want to get involved in power, it would definitely be her. Because Vilya only wanted to live a carefree and happy life where he was loved and loved by everyone. Unfortunately, fate played a joke on her. Now, not only did she want to get her hands on power, she also wanted to use the most violent method to take it from her biological father. Moreover, many of the nobles present were her close relatives and friends, but they were about to meet on the battlefield. The transition of power was never gentle. It was destined to be paved with blood and sacrifice. On the road to the peak of power, all kinship, friendship, and love would eventually turn into beautiful bubbles. The king's eyes were filled with anger and fear. He clenched his fists tightly, obviously hesitating on whether to agree to his daughter's conditions. After all, as long as there was a chance to live, not many people would choose to die. But before he could say anything, Duke Brunhilde unsheathed his sword and charged out at lightning speed. It was obvious that he wanted to use this opportunity to kill the princess. In the Duke's eyes, once the princess with royal blood died, the coup would end. Chapter 1083. Protect Her Majesty. When a knight loyal to Princess Vilya saw this, he immediately shouted and blocked the path of the other party in an attempt to stop them. Unfortunately, Duke Brunhilde's battle experience was far greater than his. Without much effort, he knocked the knight's weapon aside and smashed his fist into the knight's face. Asterisk bang. Asterisk, there was no surprise. The young knight was knocked to the ground. He tried to get up a few times, but failed in the end. His brain was still in a concussion from a blow, and he couldn't maintain his balance. The monsters and steel puppets around him didn't receive any orders from their masters and remained where they were. They didn't seem to have any intention of going over to help. There was no helping it. It was already quite impressive for mass-produced war machines to be able to do this. After all, they were just cannon fodder, and consumables used to consume and record experimental data. It wasn't worth spending too much effort on their subjective initiative. Creating an intelligent life form from nothing was never an easy task, even for the sovereigns. This involved a lot of complicated problems. Typically, if the intelligence and subjective consciousness given were too strong, these creatures would gradually develop their own ideas, and there might even be a serious situation where they rebelled against their creator. However, if the intelligence and subjective awareness given to the creatures were too weak, they wouldn't be able to achieve their goals. In short, finding a balance between the two contradictory aspects had always been the most difficult problem for the creators. Fortunately, Zhang Cheng didn't waste too much time and energy on such trivial matters, so he didn't add too much intelligence into the equation. Just as Duke Brunhilde's cold blade was about to pierce the princess's chest, a blinding arc of light appeared out of nowhere. It instantly enveloped the princess from top to bottom. When the blade and the arc of light collided, a crisp metallic sound reverberated in everyone's ears. Duke Brunhilde felt a huge rebounding force from the point of contact. He couldn't stop himself from taking 20 to 30 steps back, only stopping when he hit a stone pillar. As for the hand holding the sword, the web between his thumb and forefinger had long since cracked, and his arm was trembling uncontrollably. "My dear Duke, stabbing his niece's heart with a sword is not something an uncle should do." Along with the familiar voice, Isolde, who had remained invisible all this time, revealed himself with a faint smile on his face. It was as if he was not the mastermind behind the coup, but merely here to visit an old acquaintance. "Isolde, did you plan all this behind the scenes?" King Vinder V questioned loudly. That was right. I'm one of the masterminds," Isolde admitted with a nod. "Now, kneel down and pledge your loyalty to the new queen of the kingdom, or I guarantee that none of you will leave this place alive. Not only you, but even your families and relatives will be mercilessly purged. In Master's eyes, you nobles who emit a rotten aura have no value." "Don't do that, Master. You promise me that as long as they don't do anything to jeopardize the plan, you won't threaten their lives." Princess Vilya seemed to be afraid of causing a misunderstanding, so she hurriedly tried to stop him. "I did promise you, but at the same time, I also promised Master that I would handle this matter perfectly. Now, you have 5 minutes to persuade them to lay down their weapons and surrender. After 5 minutes, this place will be littered with corpses. Don't forget your promise to Master. His patience and tolerance are limited," Isolde said as he stared into Vilya's eyes with a threatening gaze. The motionless monsters and steel puppets seemed to have received a secret order as they surrounded them from all directions. It was as if they could attack at any moment and tear the stubborn enemies to pieces. This undoubtedly made Princess Vilya very nervous. She gritted her teeth and shouted, "Father, what are you waiting for? Could it be that you still haven't noticed that the power that Master possesses has already exceeded the limits of our imagination? Making an enemy out of him will cause the entire kingdom and the kingdom to fall beyond redemption. Could it be that you want that traitor, Kelvin Oren, to kill his way here and make all of us prisoners?" "No, of course not. I'd rather die than become his prisoner, but that's not a reason for you to start a coup." Even though Winger V's tone was filled with anger, his attitude seemed to have softened quite a bit. "Believe me, Father, if I had a second choice, I wouldn't have done what I did today. Give up resisting. That's the only way to reduce bloodshed and sacrifice. After all, enough blood has been spilled in the kingdom. It's time for the enemy to bleed." Princess Vilya stepped on the blood that was about to coagulate on the ground and took 2 steps forward, completely ignoring Duke Brunhilde, who had tried to kill her earlier. Similarly, the Duke did not attack again. Instead, he lowered his sword and turned to look at the king, waiting for him to make a decision. In fact, as an important minister who had been in the position of Minister of Defense for more than 10 years, he knew very well that at this stage of the coup, the opponent's victory could be declared. Rather than stubbornly resisting until the end, it was better to surrender. No matter what, Princess Vilya was not the kind of person who would kill everyone after the deed was done. As long as the Duke handed over his power, he could even keep his family and title intact. This was a very generous offer. The only problem was whether the king's heart could accept such a sudden change. If the king accepted, it would be a relief for everyone. However, if he did not accept, then out of loyalty to the king, everyone present would fight to the death, even if the end result would be a massacre. As military nobles, they could not lose their honor and loyalty no matter what. Otherwise, they would be mocked by the entire class and even the commoners. Time ticked by second. When the last 5 minutes were about to end, the old king finally bent his knees and knelt down. With a trembling voice, he said, "I, King Winger V, formally announce my abdication. The throne shall be inherited by Princess Vilya. Rejoice, my subjects. From today onwards, you have a new queen." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. Nothing could be more perfect than a bloody palace coup d'état ending peacefully. Chapter 1084. Damn it, damn it, damn it. How could he do this to me? When the news of the coup in the palace spread, Kelvin seemed to have gone mad. He hid in his room alone and madly smashed things. Even if his hands were badly mangled, he did not have the slightest intention of stopping. As a tyrant and an ambitious man, he always thought that his position was the most important and could not be replaced by anyone. But the result? Just as he started to get a little arrogant, Zhang Cheng mercilessly gave him a blow to the head. No threat, no warning, no notice. Instead, he directly supported another agent. And this agent was the kingdom's princess, whom he coveted, and also his most hated enemy. Kerwin could almost imagine how much of a negative impact it would have on his grand plan once he had power in Vilya. He also did not know if he would be able to receive endless support and funding in the future. For a moment, panic spread in the depths of his heart, and he no longer had the arrogance he had before. As the saying went, a person's courage and courage were supported by wealth, power, and strength. Once he lost these, his courage and courage would fall like a cliff. Even if he was once in a high position, he would quickly become no different from an ordinary person, or even worse. Just as Kerwin was venting his anger by smashing things, there was a knock on the closed door, followed by the voice of servant. "My lord, someone wants to see you." "Who? Who wants to see me? Didn't I say that I wanted to be alone for a while?" Kerwin hurriedly put away his irritable mood and deliberately asked in a deep voice. As a lord, he knew very well that the more unfavorable the situation was, the more he could not let his subordinates see him lose his composure. Otherwise, once his subordinates found out that the person they were loyal to was panicking, they would also fall into a panic. This would lead to the rapid collapse of a large force in a short period of time. "I'm sorry, he won't say who he is. He only said that he has something very important to discuss with you in person," the servant outside the door carefully explained. "All right, take him to the study. I'll be there shortly." After saying that, Kerwin quickly stuffed all the miscellaneous decorations and furniture under the bed and washed the bloodstains on the back of his hands with the clean water in the basin. As for the smashed flesh, it had already healed under the powerful recovery ability, except that the skin looked a little white and tender. After tidying up his clothes and hair, he forced himself to return to his normal state of mind. Then, he knocked on the bedroom door and headed straight for the study. Just as they arrived at the door of the study, a mysterious man covered in a cloak and a hood turned around and bowed slightly. "Ah, good afternoon, Lord Kerwin. No, perhaps I should call you Your Majesty instead. After all, you've already occupied more than half of the kingdom's territory. It won't be long before you can be crowned king and wear a crown for yourself. Who are you? Why are you being so sneaky?" Kerwin narrowed his eyes and sized the man up. "Haha, who I am is not important. What's important is that I know you're in a bit of trouble. To be exact, you've been abandoned by the master behind you." The mysterious man pointed out Kerwin's deepest fear and secret. Instantly, Kerwin's expression changed drastically. He pulled out his sword and threatened loudly. "I'll give you 10 seconds. Take off your cloak. Let me see your face." No. This is not the reaction of a smart person. Do you think that I would be afraid of a mere sword when I dare to come see you alone? If I were you, I wouldn't treat a potential ally with such an attitude. The mysterious man's tone revealed an undisguised playfulness. He didn't care about the cold magic longsword at all. I don't understand what you're saying. Leave now. Otherwise, I guarantee that the knights, monsters, and steel puppets outside will rush in and tear you to pieces. Kerwin didn't have any intention of softening his attitude and ordered him to leave without hesitation. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't need help. It was just that he didn't dare to have too much contact with this unknown person. After all, he was well aware of how terrifying Zhang Cheng's strength was. Thus, before he defeated me, he would never dare to betray Zhang Cheng. At most, he would try to probe Zhang Cheng's strength in private. All right, I'll leave now. But please don't forget that my offer is always valid. When the day comes that you've figured it out, you can contact me through this little thing. Goodbye, future king. I hope you can build a glorious and powerful empire. With that, the mysterious man bowed again. Then his whole body gradually became transparent and finally disappeared into the air. Staring at the red badge that the mysterious man left on the table, Kerwin took a deep breath and carefully checked it. His face was full of struggle and hesitation. On one hand, he didn't know if this was a plot to harm him, so he instinctively wanted to throw the badge away to prevent himself from being caught. On the other hand, he didn't want to give up an opportunity like this. However, he didn't know that not long after the mysterious man left the study, he returned to the magic tower in the depths of the forest. As soon as he took off his hood, a young face was revealed. It was Island's. At this moment, the young man had a contemptuous smile on his face. He muttered in a voice that only he could hear, "Idiot, don't let me down. Otherwise, all my efforts will be in vain." What efforts will be in vain? As soon as he finished speaking, another voice came from behind him. Aarons hurriedly turned his head and found that the master he was loyal to was already standing in the middle of the teleportation portal. His eyes were shining like the stars in the sky. Without thinking, he immediately lowered his head and replied, "It's evidence. Master, it won't be long before I can find evidence of Kerwin betraying you. Now that there's a new agent, I think there's no need to keep this hidden danger. It's time to find an opportunity to eliminate him. There's no need for that. Kerwin is still useful. You'd better not do anything unnecessary and don't act on your own. Remember, chess pieces, even the trashiest chess pieces, can play an unexpected role as long as they're used properly. What's more, Kelvin's role is far greater than you think." Chapter 1085. Your Majesty, this is an urgent document that was just sent from the border. Please read it and approve it as soon as possible. Your Majesty, this is the budget for the past few months. I have to remind you that our taxes are no longer enough to support such a large army. In 3 to 4 months at most, our national treasury will go bankrupt. There are riots. Due to the war, the price of food, meat, vegetables, cloth, and other necessities have tripled in a short period of time. Many areas, including the capital, have erupted in riots of the poor. Although they were all suppressed in the end, if the problem is not solved, I believe it will not take long for the riots to return. Villia held her forehead as she listened to the ministers and advisors report to her one by one. Her beautiful face revealed an exhausted expression. Without taking over this battered country, she would never have dreamed that the situation would be this bad. Even if Kerwin did not launch the final attack, the country would slide into the abyss of destruction after a few months of stalemate. After a full minute of silence, she raised her head and looked at Isolde, who had been silent all this time. "Master, how is the preparation of that thing coming along?" "It is completed. It can be used as a weapon on the battlefield at any time. Also, you have about half a month to prepare. After that, we must launch a war." The old man gave an affirmative answer without hesitation, his eyes revealing undisguised excitement and anticipation. As a spellcaster, there was nothing more pleasurable than creating a weapon with great destructive power. Especially the mysterious substance that was wrapped in energy, it gave him a strong urge to research it. Because until now, there was no magical energy that could compare to these seemingly insignificant little things in terms of destructive power. Very good. Then send down the order to withdraw half of the army from the front lines and send them to the strategic military towns in the south and east bordering the Polk Duchy. After half a month, officially declare war on the duchy. Tell Duke Sith too that he can either surrender or die. There is no third option. Vilya gripped the armrest of the throne tightly and gave the order without hesitation. However, this order shocked all the ministers and nobles in the room. Among them, Duke Brunhilde, who had already given up his power and was only left with the right to sit in, questioned impolitely, "Are you crazy? We are now at war with the traitor Kerwin. You actually want to provoke another country? Is the destruction of the kingdom not fast enough? No, you're the ones who don't understand the situation. Our war with Kerwin is over. From now on, he would no longer attack the remaining lands of the kingdom, but he would also not return the lands that he had conquered. To put it simply, we're currently in a delicate state of peace. Rather than taking the risk of facing off against a tough opponent like Kent, it's better to find a weaker opponent and tear them apart to make up for the kingdom's losses. The Polk Duchy's territory is only half the size of the kingdom, and it's about the same as our current strength. As long as we can defeat the enemy's main force by surprise, the kingdom will be able to annex the duchy and regain some of its power," Vilya explained as he tapped the table with his right index finger. Of course, she wasn't stupid enough to publicly announce that she had pledged her loyalty to another person. She also wouldn't tell these conservative ministers and nobles that there would be no more peace in the kingdom from now on. Instead, there would be constant wars until the kingdom finally collapsed. As the saying went, drinking poison to quench one's thirst was probably referring to her current situation. She knew that continuous wars were the path to destruction, but if she chose this path, the kingdom wouldn't even have the chance to destroy itself. It would be devoured by Kerwin, who was eyeing it covetously. Rather than lose in despair and pain, she would rather see her kingdom split apart as it grew stronger. What? Stop the war. He already has the upper hand. Why should we stop fighting? Another duke asked impatiently. It wasn't just him. Apart from the two insiders, most of the people in the hall were confused. However, Vilya obviously didn't want to dwell on this topic. She changed the topic and said, "This is a secret that I don't want to talk about right now. All you have to do is listen to my orders. Otherwise, as the queen, I will strip him of his title and territory." All right, today's meeting ends here. Let's get moving. In half a month, I hope to see a glorious victory. With that, she waved her hand, indicating that the ministers and nobles could leave. Even though many people were unwilling to leave and wanted to stay and get to the bottom of things, no one dared to act rashly under Isolt's threatening gaze. They all chose to leave obediently. It was important to note that the bloody palace coup had just taken place not long ago. Even the air was still filled with the smell of blood and coldness, reminding everyone who tried to cross the line that the young girl sitting on the throne was no longer the beloved princess, but the queen who held the power of life and death. When the last person disappeared around the corner of the corridor, Vilya asked in an uncertain tone, "Master, are you sure that weapon can help us win a crucial victory?" Isolt nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I'm very sure. Don't forget, this is a gift from the great master. His wisdom is something that you and I can never reach. Don't doubt it, don't hesitate. As long as you follow his instructions, we will be able to obtain victory after victory. Trust me, this country will prosper under your rule. Perhaps years from now, when people mention the Queen of Vilya, they will praise her loudly. She is a heroine who shames all men." Heroine? Ha ha, you really know how to joke. We all know that I'm just a puppet on strings. Not many decisions come from my heart. We are all servants, pawns controlled by the master. That's all. Vilya laughed self-deprecatingly. From her bitter tone, it wasn't hard to tell that she wasn't happy at all. Her life was full of pain and struggle. Victory is written by the victors. Almost all history books and biographies praise the emperors and conquerors who built huge territories. People didn't care what kind of stories were hidden behind those great victories. They only wanted to put themselves in the shoes of the emperor and experience that kind of arrogance. All right, don't be so discouraged. I'll take you to see the power of that weapon. When you see it with your own eyes, you'll understand that all the armies in the world are as weak as newborn babies in front of it. Chapter 1086. The open space on the west side of the palace was originally a beautiful garden used for relaxation and recreation. However, almost all the expensive and rare flowers had disappeared and were replaced by a large number of airtight fortresses. As for what was going on inside, no one knew except for the two insiders. However, at this moment, two young apprentices had been waiting for a long time not far away. One of them was holding a small object the size of a grain of rice, but it was shining with an unusually strong magical light. Even though on the surface, it seemed as if it had nothing to do with a weapon with enormous destructive power, the expressions on their faces were exceptionally careful and solemn. They did not dare to be careless in the slightest. Vilya glanced at the small ball of light and quickly asked in an uncertain tone, "This is the weapon that was created according to the knowledge that Master instilled in my brain?" "That's right. How is it? Don't you think it's incredible? With such a small size, it can destroy a city in an instant. In fact, the size you see is not the true form of the mysterious substance. The amount it contains is much smaller than what you can see with your eyes. However, in order to bind it tightly, we have to use more magical energy. Otherwise, it will destroy everything within a few kilometers in an instant," Isolde explained proudly. Although he didn't know how the device worked, and he didn't understand why the extracted unknown substance had such unimaginable power, this didn't prevent him from showing a sense of psychological superiority. After all, the knowledge in Vilya's brain was purely recorded and extracted. What he understood was less than 1/3 of what Vilya understood. Then what are we waiting for? Let's get started. I can't wait to see if this treasure that can turn a bad situation around is as exaggerated as described. After saying that, Vilya raised his arm and gestured for them to start, his eyes revealing a look of anticipation. It couldn't be helped. Currently, the kingdom was facing internal and external troubles. Many of the nobles were still full of disgust and hostility towards her act of staging a coup to ascend to the throne. They were secretly colluding with each other to non-violent non-cooperation. There were also some radicals who were trying to help the old king restore his throne. As for external troubles, needless to say, the neighboring countries had all sent more troops to the border. On the surface, it was to prevent the war from affecting their own safety. However, as long as one wasn't an idiot, one would know that this was just an excuse. Once the capital fell, all of them would choose to send out their troops and directly divide the remaining land of the kingdom. They would take as much advantage as they could. Because of this, Vilya decided to take the initiative to fight a war. He wanted to use a glorious victory to deter the surrounding enemies or potential rivals. The relationship between countries had always been so simple. If you were strong enough to tear all the challengers into pieces, leaving thousands of incomplete bodies, and countless families losing their husbands and sons, then you would win respect and respect. "Let's begin. Didn't you hear, Her Majesties?" Isolde's voice, and loud and clear, Vilya's voice. Just as everyone present subconsciously narrowed their eyes, trying to find where the grain-sized object was, a light that was countless times more dazzling than the sun was instantly released. The next second, asterisk boom, asterisk the earth shook, asterisk the residents of the entire city could clearly feel the horrifying shaking. Some of the less sturdy wooden houses and shacks collapsed instantly, and many of the lower-class citizens were crushed to death. Of course, as high and mighty nobles, they didn't care about the lives of the poor. What they cared about was what had happened. Was the princess, who had become so mysterious since her return, up to some unspeakable secret again? It was important to note that the steel puppets stationed at important locations in the capital had already made many people nervous. They were afraid that they would be dealt with after this incident. Through various secret intelligence networks, the nobles almost all knew what kind of terrifying enemies the expeditionary army had encountered. Now, these people, who had slaughtered the kingdom's soldiers on the battlefield, had appeared in their camp. It was inevitable that it would lead to a lot of speculation and speculation. However, none of this had anything to do with Isolde. He didn't care at all about what the nobles were thinking, and he didn't care if they would do something in private. In the face of absolute power, these little tricks would at most add some fun to the game and wouldn't affect the overall situation at all. If it weren't for Villia's insistence, he would even clean up the entire upper class when he launched the coup to ensure that all future troubles would be resolved once and for all. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but laugh at Villia's weakness in his heart. Then, he pointed to the place in the distance where a huge crater had been blown up and asked meaningfully, "How is it? Can you rest assured now? I swear, no country's army on this continent has a chance of winning against this weapon. It's unbelievable. How many have you made now?" Villia's voice revealed an unconcealable excitement. "Not many, including the one that was thrown away just now, a total of 3. It's enough to bring you a glorious victory. Oh, I almost forgot to tell you that if nothing goes wrong, the nobles who oppose you will soon have their eyes on this place. You'd better be careful," Isolde reminded with a faint smile. "You mean they will do everything possible to obtain the method of making this weapon through infiltration, persuasion, and bribery?" Villia was obviously not stupid and immediately realized the seriousness of the problem. It wasn't just the seriousness. If the method of making this weapon was spread, it would be an unimaginable disaster not only for the kingdom, but also for the entire world. As countless living creatures of the same kind appeared in her mind, and the beautiful and glorious city turned into ruins under such an attack, she couldn't help but shiver and feel cold all over. Isolde undoubtedly noticed the slight panic in the girl's eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly, and he secretly sighed in his heart. Master's prediction was right. Even if these foolish mortals were given the most powerful weapon, they wouldn't have enough wisdom and strength to control it. On the contrary, they would be mesmerized by the power of the weapon and then use it uncontrollably until they destroy themselves or the entire world. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1087. Panic, Chaos, Suspicion. Following the end of the test, the entire kingdom, both the ruling class and the ruled class, fell into a state of confusion. All kinds of rumors spread throughout the streets and alleys in just a few days. Some people said that it was a powerful strategic spell created by the mages trained by the royal family, and they intended to use it to recover the lost land. There were also people who said that this was some kind of ancient artifact that had been hidden by the royal family. They even made up a story, linking the royal family's bloodline with the heroes and gods in those myths, to prove that they were born noble and should be the supreme king. However, for the nobles who knew some gossip, the nonsense of the people at the bottom was not worth paying attention to. There was no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world, especially since Villia had just ascended the throne and there was no great purge. Many people in the palace were still loyal to the old king. With their skillful political skills, the nobles who had lost power quickly realized that the earth-shattering explosion was actually a kind of weapon, a consumable product that could be made with the help of spellcasters. After figuring this out, even Wenger V, who was under house arrest, could not help but start to take action. His heart, which had been silent, was like a burning flame. There was no doubt that he was not willing to withdraw from the political stage as a failure, and he was even more unwilling to give up his rights as king. He longed for revenge. He longed to prove himself once again, that he was still the wise and mighty king who had brought prosperity to the kingdom for decades, and not a mediocre king who had humiliated the kingdom and lost more than half of its land. Just as the undercurrent in the kingdom's capital was surging, Isolde quietly left the center of the vortex and returned to the top floor of the magic tower. He bent down and bowed deeply to the object of his loyalty. "Master, I have arranged the stage according to your instructions." "Oh, so fast?" Zhang Cheng asked casually. "Yes, the plan is much smoother than I thought. Just like a book in the library mentioned, mortals can never get rid of the control of greed and desire, even if they know that these two things will have disastrous consequences. As far as I know, there are at least 3 forces that have secretly tried to rope in and bribe the people involved in the production. When the first war is over, this number will increase, and at the same time, the temptation will become greater and greater. I don't think that those apprentices would give up a pile of wealth, power, and status for some illusory loyalty. When he said that, Isolde's tone was full of sarcasm, as well as a bit of sorrow. Because he was also a mortal, he couldn't resist temptation. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the servant of this powerful, godlike god. As a smart person, he knew very well that from the moment they reached an agreement, he had no chance of breaking free from the control of the other party. The only thing he could do was to obey orders. Zhang Cheng nodded expressionlessly as he sensed the old man's complicated thoughts. You're right. But don't forget that there are also some people among mortals who can make unexpected choices at certain special moments and occasions. They can reject the temptation of beauty, ignore the enormous wealth, and give up their high and mighty positions, all for the strong sense of justice, duty, love, family, friendship, and so on. In my opinion, if they don't exist in a story, then the whole story will pale in comparison. So, you want a hero? Isolde's eyes widened, as if he had seen a ghost. Ha ha, that's right, a hero. A hero who dares to step forward at a critical moment, saving the world with unparalleled courage when everyone is in despair. How about it? Can you help me find such a hero? Zhang Cheng laughed as he stood up and picked up an exquisite long sword from the shelf. It emitted an enormous amount of magical energy. The sword was so beautiful that runes that others couldn't understand flickered on its surface. Even those who didn't know the sword would understand that its value couldn't be measured by money. A divine weapon. A real divine weapon. A divine weapon with self-awareness. Isolde opened his mouth wide in shock. After a long while, he asked with a wry smile, "This is the weapon you prepared for the hero?" Zhang Cheng nodded without hesitation. "That's right. Since he's a hero, of course he has to have a weapon worthy of him. How about it? Haven't I thought it through? Of course, this weapon can't be handed over too easily. He has to go through a series of cruel and dangerous trials. Spread the news that an ancient ruin has been discovered in the forest. It emits an astonishing amount of magical energy, and it's very likely to hide a powerful magical item." Isolde seemed to understand something, and took the initiative to finish the second half of the sentence. Then, a large number of adventurers and various factions will send people to spread the news. The one who successfully obtains this long sword will become the hero you choose? He finally understood that his master wanted to play a classic game between the hero and the Demon King. But this time, the Demon King's power was beyond imagination, and the hero was just a chess piece that could be manipulated and manipulated. No matter what, he couldn't escape the Demon King's control. You're half right. One is not only a game, but also many interesting experiments. Whether it's data collection or human nature testing. I like to see people's expressions when they're full of hope and then fall into despair. I even like to see the fall of souls or the sublimation of souls. All right, go about your business. From today onwards, you and Islands have the right to enter and exit the library at any time. After saying that, Zhang Cheng put the longsword back on the shelf and waved his hand lightly. He began to think about what kind of ruins he should build, what kind of puzzles he should create, and what kind of monsters he should prevent from testing these heroes. To him, this was a very interesting way to pass the time. After all, with an almost endless lifespan, he had to find a way to pass the time. Thank you for your kindness and generosity. I swear that I'll never betray you, and I won't let you down. After getting what he had always wanted, Isolde hurriedly knelt down in excitement, his old hands trembling. The endless magical knowledge in the library was a treasure that he had longed for since a long time ago. Now, he could finally fulfill his wish. Chapter 1088. The war between the Anoya Kingdom and the POC Duchy broke out very quickly without any warning. Interestingly, it ended very quickly as well. It took less than half a day from the beginning to the end of the war. To be more precise, the real battle lasted only a few minutes. As the weapons that were beyond the comprehension of this planet civilization were used in battle, the nobles and soldiers of the POC Duchy lost more than half of their troops before they could even react to what was happening. Unsurprisingly, The surviving fellows didn't even think about it before they turned around and started to run away crazily. While some of them were brave and didn't fear death, it was futile in the face of a force that they couldn't fight against. What other choice did they have apart from running? If it weren't for the fact that they used traditional cavalry to reduce unnecessary consumption, there might not even be a single survivor on the battlefield. Even so, the upper echelons of the POC duchy were almost all wiped out. Tens of noble families that had lasted for hundreds of years faced the predicament of not having a successor, and the entire country faced the risk of its order collapsing. This risk didn't come from external invaders, but from the deaths of many elites within the country. In this backward world, where the spread of knowledge and information was very slow, the time, energy, and consumption needed to cultivate a talent was enough to drag down a small businessman with a relatively high income. Once a large number of elites died, the country would face the problem of not being able to maintain the effective operation of the administrative structure. As a country with feudal nobles as the main body, the deaths of a large number of nobles in the POC duchy directly caused the rear to be unable to organize any decent resistance. Moreover, even if some families tried to rely on their sturdy castles to resist, due to the lack of people who could convince the public, they couldn't unite and were defeated one by one. As the capital of the POC duchy was occupied, the surrounding people who wanted to take advantage of the situation were shocked to discover that the POC duchy that they viewed as a juicy piece of meat was actually hiding such a terrifying trump card. All of a sudden, countless spies disguised as various identities came to the capital of the POC duchy and began to secretly inquire about the mysterious weapon. Of course, this was merely a topic of conversation in the eyes of ordinary people. They were more concerned about the rumors of ancient ruins and treasures circulating in the market. In an inconspicuous tavern, more than a dozen fully armed adventurers were gathered together, drinking and exchanging information with each other. One of the men, who didn't look young, raised his head and drank the drink in the cup. Then he grinned and said, "Guys, do you know, I have a feeling that we'll make a fortune this time." "Oh, how do you know that we will definitely make a fortune?" Another young man blinked his eyes curiously. "Ha ha, could it be that you still don't know about that ancient legend? The legend of the Holy Sword?" The man laughed and asked. The young man hurriedly shook his head. "No, I've never heard of it. What is a sacred sword?" The sacred sword is a powerful divine weapon. It was said that in ancient times, a god had personally created it and bestowed it to a nameless hero. This hero relied on the unparalleled power of the Holy Sword to not only defeat the insufferably arrogant undead army, but also killed the powerful evil Dragon King. In order to prevent this holy sword from falling into the wrong hands, the hero built a temporary mausoleum. Now, his soul is guarding the holy sword in the mausoleum, waiting for the next successor with the posture of a hero to come. Not far away, a mysterious man covered in a hood took the initiative to answer. Could it be that this ruin is the mausoleum of the nameless hero? The young man stood up excitedly. Just like a saying, in the depths of every intelligent life, there was a hidden dream of becoming a hero. This was the embodiment of social nature, the proof of the desire to be recognized and praised by the same kind. Very few people could resist the temptation of this dream, especially the young people who liked to fantasize. As long as they were given a little hope and encouragement, they would become enthusiastic, even if it meant risking their lives. "Sorry, I'm just a scholar. Before seeing the ruin with my own eyes, I can't be sure whether it is or not." The mysterious man replied without raising his head. "Then, are you interested in coming with us?" The middle-aged man who spoke first took the initiative to make an invitation. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he always felt that when he looked at the face hidden under the hood, there would always be a strong sense of fuzziness, so much so that he couldn't remember anything at all. Because of this, he felt that this mysterious man was definitely not simple, so he wanted to test him. But unfortunately, the mysterious man obviously didn't have such plans. He smiled and refused. "No, I'm not interested. I'm a scholar, not a spellcaster, nor a warrior. I'll be a burden on your team, and my mouth is very picky." I can't eat the hard-to-swallow barbecued meat and dry food in the wild. Finally, thank you for your invitation, but things like adventure should be left to professionals like you. As soon as he finished speaking, he threw a few silver coins, stood up, and walked out of the tavern. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared from everyone's sight. When he was completely far away, the middle-aged man immediately ordered a short man next to him, "Go, follow him. Find out who he is." "Understood." The short man immediately put down the food in his hand, picked up a dirty linen cloth to wipe his hands and mouth, and strode forward to catch up with the mysterious man at a very fast speed. The two men, one in front and one behind, shuttled through the complicated and dark alleys for about 10 minutes. Suddenly, he found that the target in front of him suddenly turned into a dim light all over the sky. Such a horrifying, strange, and beyond the scope of understanding made the short man shiver uncontrollably. He gritted his teeth and complained, "Damn it, what the hell?" But despite his complaints, he still obediently circled around several times. After confirming that the target was really gone, he went back the way he came, dejected. But he obviously didn't notice that as soon as he left, the light spots under his feet gathered again and formed the shape of a man. The mysterious man's mouth was slightly raised, and a playful smile appeared on his face. Then he took off his hood, revealing the old face of Isolt. Needless to say, the rumors that were spreading everywhere, true and false, were all spread by him in this way. He even provided some information to the potential adventure teams. Chapter 1089. Master, this is the data that was just sent back. Please take a look. On the top floor of the Mage Tower, Islands presented a silver-white metal disc with both hands, a relaxed expression on his face. The reason was very simple. One of his most hated opponents, Kerwin, was now in great trouble. Not only did he not dare to attack the remaining lands of the kingdom, but he also had to guard against strategic weapons with great destructive power. He was in such a sorry state that he was like a mouse caught in a bellows. Judging from his recent movements, this tyrant was already looking for a new direction of attack, giving up on his original plan of annexing the kingdom and becoming king. There was no other way. The current queen of the kingdom, Villia, was no longer the cute little lamb that could be needed by others. Instead, she was a tigress with her mouth wide open, crazily devouring fresh meat. He had gone from being on the offensive side with a firm advantage to being on the defensive side of the weak side. What was even more frightening was that he still did not understand what his master was thinking. Was he planning to replace him and get rid of him? Or did he just want to give him a stern warning that he had crossed the line? Unfortunately, Kerwin did not have the means to obtain relevant information, nor did he dare to do any probing. He was like a frightened bird, trembling in fear. After tasting the taste of supreme power and seeing the pairs of eyes filled with respect and fear, he could no longer go back to the past and be satisfied with being a small lord at the border between civilization and wilderness. Zhang Cheng undoubtedly knew what the young man was thinking at this moment. He took the disc and asked with a faint smile, "You seem to be in a good mood recently, don't you?" "Of course, Master. This is all thanks to your wisdom and foresight. All the plans are being carried out very smoothly, and my work is much easier. I have more time to spend in the library to read and understand the profound and difficult magical knowledge." Allens placed one hand on his chest and bowed deeply. Yes, on the surface, the plan is indeed going quite smoothly, so smoothly that it's unbelievable. Zhang Cheng nodded thoughtfully. He did not know why, but recently he had a feeling that something important was about to happen, and it was closely related to him. Even though he was notoriously bad at this aspect, ever since he became a ruler, he had more or less gained some sensory abilities. This was the universe's reward for its most beloved child, a favor from a life form that stood at the peak of life evolution. No ruler would ignore their own senses, no matter how vague or difficult it was to decipher. Islands did not know that his master's thoughts had already jumped out of this planet and entered the deep and boundless outer space. He lowered his head and carefully asked, "Master, about that underground ruin, it's almost finished. I wonder when you plan to decorate it and make sure it's like a real ancient ruin, filled with monsters treasures, and puzzles. Don't worry, my loyal servant. Those adventurers are still on their way, and I have plenty of time to slowly set things up. In addition, you will never know what kind of surprise I left for them in the deepest part of the labyrinth. After saying that, Zhang Cheng's lips curve into a beautiful arc, looking cruel and evil. Oh, what is it? Alan's eyes revealed a strong sense of curiosity. Hee, a surprise is a surprise. The most important thing is to maintain a sense of mystery and anticipation. If you know in advance, then it won't be a surprise. All right, now go to your work. Don't disturb me for the next few days. I have many ideas that need to be put into action. After saying that, Zhang Cheng waved his hand and placed the disc on a stand. Instantly, the metal disc began to release rays of light, and these rays of light formed countless complex symbols. Without a doubt, these symbols were encrypted data. Apart from the person himself, there was no way a second person could read them. Islands merely stood in place and glanced at it twice, realizing that he did not recognize a single symbol. He could only sigh in annoyance and walk toward the library alone. Perhaps in his inherent mindset, if there were words and symbols that he did not recognize, then it must be because he did not study hard enough and did not understand that there were things in the universe that could not be made up for by studying. Sometimes it was a difference in the nature of life. After a few minutes, the light on the disc gradually dimmed. Zhang Cheng casually dismantled the disc and returned to his throne. He rubbed his chin and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "Interesting. I never thought that my true advantage would be so strange. I could completely hide it and use it as a trump card." What trump card? Along with a familiar voice, Gru suddenly appeared out of thin air. His tone revealed undisguised exhaustion. Although he looked like a large beetle and it was difficult to distinguish his facial expression, the weakness of his body and soul could not be faked. "What's wrong with you? Did you fight with the other rulers?" Zhang Cheng rubbed his chin and asked with interest. Gru shook his head without thinking. "No, it wasn't a battle. I recently did a series of extremely large space-time journeys. I did some necessary preparations." "Oh, right, the other one you asked me to pass on a message. He will soon appear in another life form. You had best be careful." "What do you mean? You saw him?" Zhang Cheng's expression immediately became serious when he heard about the initiator. His gaze was filled with scrutiny. "Yes, I saw him. He's someone as crazy and terrifying as you. My guess is that he's conducting some forbidden experiments. He plans to become the most powerful ruler in the universe. You, on the other hand, are the most important step in his entire plan." Gruden tried to hide anything and openly revealed everything he knew. "What forbidden experiments?" "I'm sorry, I can't say. Otherwise, you would do the same thing. Remember, this universe is far larger than you can imagine. It hides countless secrets. Some of them we can understand, but there are some that even rulers cannot understand, much less control. They're like uncertain factors. Every time one is triggered, it can lead to an irreversible disaster. That's all I have to say. I suggest that you join the Chaos faction and form an alliance with the other 9 rulers to protect yourself. As long as you're alive, his ambitions will never succeed." Chapter 1090. There was no doubt that Gru's sudden warning made Zhang Cheng fall into deep thought. However, he didn't feel any worry or fear. Instead, he felt an unprecedented curiosity. This was because he sensed an unprecedented fear from Gru's words, as if he was afraid of something happening. For a ruler who was said to stand at the apex of life in the universe, such emotions were truly unusual. Even though Zhang Cheng wasn't sure what the initiators were planning, he was certain that this plan had something to do with some secret he didn't know about. At the thought of this, he became excited. As for worry and fear, they had long since been eliminated from his mind. He would be calm even in the face of death, and not cry bitterly like an ordinary person. He wouldn't be in a state of extreme excitement, doing things that he would never do under normal circumstances. Just as he finished building the complicated underground maze and began to investigate the so-called taboo, the first group of adventurers finally reached their destination after going through untold hardships. Staring at the huge and dilapidated arched tomb entrance, The man in the lead couldn't help but exclaim, "Heavens! There's actually a huge underground labyrinth in the middle of nowhere. It's truly unbelievable. Look at these exquisite carvings and the surrounding stone pillars and statues. It's even more gorgeous than a palace. I wonder how much manpower and material resources were expended to build it back then." Another member also sighed. "Ha ha! Look, there's not even a footprint here. That's right. No matter what kind of treasure is buried here, it belongs to us now. Let's set up camp and rest for the night. We'll start exploring tomorrow morning. Light a bonfire. Send 2 people to hunt some animals. We'll eat a hot meal and then have a good night's sleep. We've been constantly on the move these past few days, and I'm almost out of energy." Just like that, the team members began to carry out their duties amidst a cheerful atmosphere. Some went to chop firewood and boil water, while others entered the forest to hunt small animals. About an hour later, the sun was about to set. White steam rose from several large pots, along with a rich aroma of meat. Those who had never experienced a long journey in the wild would never understand how painful it was to be forced to eat dried food and meat jerky for 10 days to half a month. Not to mention the lack of vitamin supplements. Just the dry and hard texture would cause great damage to the teeth. Eating these things for a long time would not only lead to various gastrointestinal diseases, but the rate of tooth would also be much higher than that of ordinary people. Therefore, when they were able to camp in a relatively safe place and eat a warm meal, it was definitely a supreme enjoyment for them. But just as these adventurers were immersed in the delicacies, a black shadow silently walked out of the tomb. Its movements were so gentle that it didn't make a single sound. Its 2 dark red eyes were filled with hatred and cruelty. The meal lasted for a very short time, about 10 minutes. When several people took the wooden bowls they carried with them to the riverside to clear the water, the dark shadow quietly followed behind a young man. The moment the young man bent down, the black shadow suddenly pounced on him and pressed him to the ground with lightning speed. Then it opened its bloody mouth and sucked out with all its might. In less than a minute, the young man's soul was sucked out alive and devoured. But this was not the end. After killing its target and devouring his soul, the dark shadow raised its black claws and peeled off the skin of its target alive, slowly putting it on its own body. What was incredible was that once the bloody skin came into contact with its body, it instantly healed as if it had come alive. In the end, it became exactly the same as the dead young man, except that its eyes still emitted red light from time to time. Glancing at the skinless corpse that had been thrown into the river, the monster let out a low and hoarse sneer. It turned around and picked up the wooden bowl that had fallen on the ground, washed it simply with drinking water, and then returned to the camp. The adventurers who knew nothing were still gathered together, excitedly discussing tomorrow's expedition. None of them realized that a terrifying monster had been lurking among them. When the last trace of the sun had completely disappeared and the sky was dominated by the endless stars, most people opened their sleeping bags or blankets, closed their eyes, and slowly fell asleep. Only 2 or 3 people were left in charge of the first night watch. As there were no traces of carnivores in the surroundings and no traces of their own kind, the night watch's vigilance was very low. They just sat around the campfire, chatting intermittently. The dark shadow took this opportunity to secretly knock out a woman with a punch and drag her into the bushes where the campfire could not reach. It used the exact same method to devour her soul, peel off her skin, and disguise herself as someone else. Obviously, the identity of a woman was far more useful than that of a man, especially since it could fully utilize the body's physiological urges. After a short while, 4 or 5 men were tricked into the bushes and became the prey of the dark shadow. Its killing was so stealthy and efficient that a third of the team had mysteriously disappeared without anyone noticing. The next morning, when the leader had planned to have a group of people guard the camp and another group follow him into the underground, he suddenly realized that his team had lost a lot of members. He immediately began to organize people to look around. In the end, as expected, some people who were good at tracking easily found the skin corpses. Damn it, who can tell me what the F*** happened? The leader cursed loudly with a trembling voice. Although the corpses were skinless, it was not difficult to determine their true identity from the height and color of their pupils. When all the corpses were found, his hands and feet began to tremble uncontrollably, and his eyes revealed panic and fear from the bottom of his heart. There was no way he could not be afraid. They had only slept for a short while, and a third of the adventurer team that they had painstakingly put together had mysteriously died. Moreover, all the corpses had been skinned without exception. Some of the skin had completely disappeared, while others were carelessly thrown on the ground. Leader, do you think there's some deadly trap or monster hidden in the tomb that we don't know about? After all, we've walked for so long, and we've never encountered a situation like this. But we've only stayed here for a night, and a third of our people have been mysteriously killed. Another young man in leather armor asked carefully. Chapter 1091. You mean something terrible is coming out of the entrance? The leader narrowed his eyes and showed a serious expression. From a certain perspective, the real adventure had yet to begin, but the team had already lost 1/3 of its members in one night. It was simply a complete nightmare. If the legendary Holy Sword was not lying inside, he would definitely leave with the rest of the team without hesitation. But there was a saying that went, "Men die for wealth, and birds die for food." When there was a huge temptation, most lives would become particularly stupid. Many times, they knew that there was danger, but they still chose to take the risk without hesitation. The gambler's spirit existed in the depths of everyone's heart. The young man in leather armor bent down and used the dagger he carried with him to pick up a piece of human skin. He explained in a deep voice, "That's right. Please look at the skin that has been peeled off. What do you think it's used for?" "Camouflage." The leader suddenly woke up, his whole body trembling slightly uncontrollably. At the same time, he looked at the rest of the team with a scrutinizing gaze. "That monster, it's hiding among us." "What? You mean it used the skin that it peeled off to disguise itself as one of us?" "Damn it. Who is it? Get the F*CK out of here." Accompanied by a mixture of fear and anger, every member of the team pulled out their weapons and stared nervously at their companions. The originally united and harmonious atmosphere became tense all of a sudden. For a moment, the feelings of antagonism and uneasiness spread rapidly. It was like a pile of dry firewood that had been splashed with gasoline. Now, it only needed a little spark to immediately ignite into a huge fire. As a special group that lived on the edge of the blade, adventurers were not like the tenant farmers who meekly submitted to adversity. After many years of battle and travel, they had accumulated a wealth of experience that made them particularly efficient in killing. They were even more powerful than most professional soldiers when it came to small-scale fights. They had always been an unstable factor in society, especially in the big cities where adventurers gathered. Every few days, there would be a conflict between an adventurer team and the local law enforcement agency. They even killed some guards and fled. Therefore, when their lives were threatened, only God knew what kind of outrageous things they would do. "Damn it, put away your F*King weapons. What do you want? We haven't even found a monster, and you want to kill each other first?" The leader realized that the situation was not good. He immediately stood up and shouted loudly, trying to stop the situation from worsening. Unfortunately, just as everyone carefully retreated to a safe distance and was about to obey the order, a scream suddenly came from the forest. Get lost! Get lost, you monster! It's Emerson." Heavens! The monster is with him." A woman with a short bow immediately turned around and rushed towards the source of the sound. After the rest of the people reacted, they followed closely behind. After running for about 3 to 4 minutes, they finally saw a young man who looked about 18 years old lying in a pool of blood. The skin on the left side of his face had been cut open, revealing the bright red flesh inside. Strictly speaking, this kind of injury was far from serious. As long as there was no infection or inflammation, the patient would stutter within a few days. However, the visual effect was extremely terrifying. "Emerson, tell me, where are the monsters? Where is the monster that attacked you? Who did it disguise as?" The leader asked quickly as he gestured for someone to bandage the wound. The young man called Emerson was still in shock. He raised his arm and pointed towards the depths of the forest. It disguised itself as Cade and ran over there. Go after it. No matter what, we can't let that guy get away. The leader then ordered and took the lead to rush out. Disguises and deception had always been the most terrifying things. They could destroy the strongest fortress from the inside. At the same time, they could also destroy a person's psychological defense, causing them to unconsciously lose their vigilance. If there was a monster that could disguise itself as the most familiar and trusted person at any time and place, then the threat it brought was even more frightening than encountering a giant dragon. Therefore, even if it was to maintain the stability of the whole team, it had to be dealt with as quickly as possible. However, these panicked adventurers did not realize that just as they turned around to chase after the so-called monster, the young man lying in the pool of blood suddenly revealed a strange smile. He quickly got up from the ground and followed behind one of his companions who was left alone. About 7 to 8 minutes later, another scream echoed in the forest. With indescribable deception and disguise, this unknown black shadow killed 90% of the adventurers in less than a day. When the sun set again, the leader and the remaining members of the Three Lights had long given up on their meaningless hunting. Their eyes were filled with fear as they scanned their surroundings, especially the human skins that were deliberately hung high up on the ground. They were on the verge of collapse. Despair. Although they had experienced many dangers, they had never experienced something like this. Every one of them was exuding a chill from the inside out. Even the last few of them were afraid of each other. They did not dare to trust each other completely. This was because they did not know if the monster had put on new human skins and was hiding beside them. They did not dare to rest. They did not dare to sleep. They did not dare to go out alone. The leader did not know how long he could last. He only knew that if he could not survive the night, the entire adventurers would be annihilated. They would become the first batch of sacrifices. Just when everyone was silent, the woman with the short bow suddenly spoke up. We can't just stay here like this. We have to find a way to escape. I don't want to die. I don't want my skin to be peeled off. How do we escape? It's nighttime now. That monster might be observing our every move in the forest. Another man retorted angrily. There's only one monster. We can split up and escape. The woman's eyes flashed with a strange light as she suggested. What? Are you crazy? It will catch up with us and kill us one by one. The last person shook his head without thinking. However, the leader realized that the woman was trying to say something. He subconsciously tightened his grip on his weapon and said with a slightly hoarse voice, No, as long as we escape fast enough, at most, it can catch up with one of us. The remaining 3 can survive. This is like drawing lots. No one knows who will draw the worst lot. Everything depends on fate and luck. What do you think? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1092. There was no doubt that betting on luck was the fairest way to escape. Because no one knew who the terrifying skinning monster would choose as its prey, everyone had a 75% chance of escaping. The unlucky ones only had a 25% chance of being caught. As a common trait of intelligent life, they also had an instinct to deceive themselves. They only believed what was beneficial to them and subconsciously blocked out the unfavorable parts. Every member of the team believed that they would be one of the 3 lucky ones. They didn't think that they would be so unlucky as to hit the jackpot with only a 25% chance. And so, after a simple allocation of directions, the 4 of them rushed out in 4 different directions at the same time. There was no hesitation or hesitation. The only thing they wanted to do was to escape from this nightmare situation and give up on the dangerous profession of adventurers. They wanted to find a peaceful place to live out the rest of their lives with the money they had earned with their lives and blood. After all, this encounter was like a dark cloud hanging over their heads. It was something they would never forget for the rest of their lives. They would even have nightmares every night when they went to sleep. In particular, the bloody human skins and the twitching corpses that had been stripped of their skin greatly stimulated his senses and brain, leaving a deep impression in the deepest part of his memory. Run, run, run. Due to the intense exercise, their lungs began to produce an indescribable burning sensation. But none of the four running for their lives stopped. They desperately opened their mouths and sucked in large mouthfuls of oxygen to provide a steady stream of energy for their muscles. They ran faster and farther than the other three. However, according to each person's talent and degree of training, there would be a difference in endurance. In less than 10 minutes, the first person to slow down appeared. She was a woman who looked quite young. Her face was particularly pale due to the exhaustion. Her breathing was also becoming more and more erratic. As she ran, she didn't forget to look back at the dark forest. All of a sudden, she seemed to have tripped over something and fell flat on her face. She rolled on the uneven ground for several meters before coming to a stop. But before she could struggle to get up from the ground, a shadow slowly walked out from the darkness and said in a mocking tone, "Ah, my dear friends, where are you going without me? You're Carence?" No, Carence was dead. You're the skinning monster." The woman's expression changed drastically. She quickly pulled out her weapon and prepared to fight to the death. However, it wasn't hard to tell from the despair in her eyes that she had already determined that she was doomed. The only thing she could do was to buy some time for the other three. "Monster? It is not a polite word to use to describe me. Do you know? My life form is actually much more advanced than yours. I can even obtain your memories and knowledge by devouring your souls, evolving from an ignorant beast to my current form in a short period of time. Look, I can speak your language and understand your thoughts. I can even disguise myself perfectly." The black figure raised his hands high and boasted proudly. "Bah, how dare you claim to be superior to us? No, at best, you're a deranged monster. Just wait and see. One day, some adventurer will chop off your head." The woman spat viciously and cursed loudly. "Ha ha, you have more backbone than I thought. You're a good prey. At least, you're 100 times better than those guys who kept begging for their lives. But I hope you won't make too much noise when I skin you. Otherwise, I'll be very disappointed. And if I'm disappointed, my skinning speed will slow down." The black figure laughed threateningly. This time, the woman didn't retaliate with words. Instead, she pulled out a dagger from her belt and threw it with all her strength. She wanted to injure the black figure before the battle began. Even if the black figure didn't get hurt, it would still cause some disruption and create an opportunity for the black figure to attack. "You overestimate yourself." The black figure didn't even use any weapons. He blocked the sharp blade with his arm. When the dagger came into contact with the black figure's skin, the sound of metal colliding rang out. "Die, monster! Monster!" The woman roared and launched a decisive charge. As the saying went, the one who struck first had the advantage. In a battle, the attacker always had the initiative and could gain many advantages. On the other hand, if the defender made even the slightest mistake, the consequences would be irreversible. But unfortunately, this set of rules didn't apply to the black figure. His skin was like an armor. Normal weapons could only leave a white mark on it. They couldn't even touch the body wrapped under the skin. After a few attacks, the woman finally realized that there was an insurmountable gap between her and her opponent. With a dejected look, she stopped attacking and placed the weapon on her neck, stabbing it down without thinking. Needless to say, she wanted to kill herself to get rid of the pain and torture. In some special situations, death wasn't just the end of life. It was also a release. But before the cold gleam of the sharp blade could stab down, the black shadow suddenly rushed forward at a speed that could not be seen by the naked eye. He grabbed the weapon and threw it far away. He said with a hideous smile, "You want to commit suicide? Wishful thinking. This is my hunt. You're my prey. Without my permission, you don't even have the right to kill yourself. Now, it's time to start the final ceremony. Don't worry, it won't be long before I get rid of your remaining companions." "No." Along with the heart-wrenching scream that echoed in the pitch-black darkness, something terrible finally happened. When the other three survivors heard this voice, without exception, they once again mustered all their strength and ran madly, afraid that they would become the next victim. But they didn't notice that there wasn't only one black figure. There was one behind each of them. From the beginning to the end of the escape plan, It took less than 20 minutes for the entire adventure team to be wiped out. After their bloody corpses were dragged together and buried together, these monsters who had already put on human skins sat together and began to communicate with each other in a very special way. After a while, they used the tools and weapons left behind by the adventure team to disguise themselves. They even built a small camp and were ready to wait for the next batch of victims. Chapter 1093. It was a perfect hunt, wasn't it? When you created these monsters, did you ever think that they could evolve from wild beasts that only knew how to kill so quickly into monsters with complex thinking and strong camouflage and deceit? On the top floor of the magic tower, Island stared at the images transmitted by the magic mirror as he pursed his lips and asked with a smile. Needless to say, he was full of curiosity about the skinning monsters. He even felt that these creatures were of a higher level than himself. They didn't need to spend a lot of time and energy to learn, nor did they need to accumulate experience bit by bit. As long as they devoured the target's soul and wore the target's skin, they could immediately obtain all the memories, experience, and knowledge. Zhang Cheng sat on the throne with one hand holding his chin and casually replied, "It was indeed a perfect hunt, but you don't have to be envious. Although the skinning monster's learning speed is unmatched by any other race, they have a fatal flaw. That is, they can only imitate and never create. You have to understand that a species without the ability to create has no future." "I see." Allens nodded thoughtfully, but soon he couldn't help but ask, "Since there is no future, why did you create them?" "There is no special reason. I just wanted to give it a try. Now it seems that they didn't disappoint me. At least they can eliminate a large number of unqualified fellows and let the truly strong adventurers enter the entrance to the underground." After saying this, Zhang Cheng raised his arm and waved his hand. The magic mirror that was continuously displaying images stopped and returned to its normal state. Without a doubt, his mind was no longer on these little games to pass the time, so he didn't seem to be in high spirits at all. But unfortunately, Islands obviously didn't notice this. He was still excitedly praising, "Unbelievable! With just one attempt, you created such a powerful and interesting monster. You are simply the creator of the legends that surpasses the gods. To be able to serve such a great being like you is my greatest honor." "No, young man. Although creating life isn't easy, it isn't as complicated as you think. First, you have to understand the nature of life. You have to understand the prerequisites of the decisive factors in the creation process. Next, you have to solve the technical problems. In the end, you need to have your own ideas and not blindly imitate others. After all, the creation of life was not something that could be accomplished overnight, and it was not something that could be produced by craftsmen in a workshop. On the contrary, it is an art that is constantly changing and full of surprises. Only when you truly understand it will you experience the feeling of constant surprises." Zhang Chen casually explained to the young man about the experience of creating life. One had to know that creating an intelligent race wasn't too difficult for many powerful life forms. The real difficulty was to create a species that was incomparably powerful and full of potential in the future. However, on this remote and backward planet, monsters like the skinless monster were already strong enough. There was no need to make it too exaggerated. Otherwise, the game would lose its fun due to the difference in strength. In his eyes, the real adventure was to encounter a powerful but not invincible enemy or monster. And the skinning monster happened to be a guard that looked very strong on the surface, but had a few obvious flaws. Unfortunately, the members of the adventure team were so frightened that they didn't even notice the hints that were deliberately left behind. In the end, it led to the complete annihilation of the team. Not a single one of them managed to escape. "You mean, I can also become a creator?" Islands was so excited that he began to tremble, his eyes blazing with fire. Zhang Cheng nodded without hesitation. "Of course. You can find books about this in the library on the 634 bookshelf. But I have to remind you, don't be too obsessed, or you will soon encounter your first failure. Creating life, especially creating a race that you can control, requires repeated and strict experiments. The biggest characteristic of intelligent life is that they have an independent personality and the ability to think. They won't blindly worship their creator for a long time, and even have strong feelings of resistance, trying to kill their creator to prove that they are special. I don't want to see the day when you are killed by your own creation. That would be the greatest tragedy of a creator. Please don't worry. I would rather destroy my own creation than allow them to resist. Power. As long as there is enough power, any resistance is futile. Islands clenched his fists tightly and replied resolutely. You're right. In order to become the creator, one must first possess overwhelming power. If there is anything absolute in this world, it must be power. Only power will never lie to you, and only power will never betray you. No matter what happens in the future, it will always be your most steadfast support. Friends can be betrayed, allies can be betrayed, loved ones can be abandoned, but power will accompany you to the end of your life. Go, my servant, do whatever you want. I want to see how far you can go. When he said this, Zhang Cheng's tone revealed a strong hint. He could feel that as the power of chaos began to take root and germinate in this mortal's body, the latter's life form had already transformed. He was like a speeding carriage, rushing wildly towards a road of no return. No one knew what would happen to the youth in the future, but one thing was certain, and that was that he would eventually become less and less like his original self, whether it was his mind or his soul. Thank you for your generosity and benevolence. I swear that I will not disappoint you. Islands placed one hand on his chest and bowed deeply. He was so excited at the moment that he ignored the playful look that flashed through Zhang Cheng's eyes. Soon, he left the top floor of the tower and returned to the library below. He began to read books on life creation like a madman, and soon he was deeply immersed in it, unable to extricate himself. As a spellcaster, this was the first time he knew that there was so much complicated information hidden within a seemingly simple life form. There were many technical terms that were difficult to read, even through magic. Some words had to be read over and over again dozens of times before he could barely understand the meaning. However, Islands was not discouraged. Instead, he became unusually excited. This was because he felt that such unfamiliar and difficult knowledge was in line with the high-end technology of life creation. He did not understand that he had unknowingly become a test subject. Chapter 1094. While the adventurers arrived at the entrance of the ruins in batches and fought with the skinning monsters in disguise, Vilya was sitting in the hall of her castle in the capital of the Poke Duchy. She looked down at the old man kneeling in front of her, as well as his wife and 4 successors. Without a doubt, this man was none other than Duke Xerxes II, who had just experienced a terrible battle. As he hadn't been on the battlefield himself, he still couldn't figure out how the army he sent out was completely wiped out. Not even one of the informants managed to escape. Of course, there was no point in discussing this now. His only hope was that the other party would be merciful and not cruelly execute his family. As for the rest, whether it was confiscating his property or exiling them to a remote island overseas for the rest of their lives, it didn't matter. As long as they were alive, there was hope. As long as they were alive, they could pass down their noble bloodline and even revive their country one day. Your Grace, if I remember correctly, you were given a chance to surrender before the battle, but you didn't cherish it. Tell me, do you regret it now? Vilya fiddled with her gorgeous dress as she looked up into the other party's eyes, trying to find a trace of resentment and unwillingness. Unfortunately, Xerxes too didn't show any hostility at all. Instead, he directly prostrated himself on the ground and replied with a bitter smile, "I'm sorry, Your Majesty. It was my arrogance and stupidity that made me commit an unforgivable mistake. As a price, I'm willing to give up my territory and title and transfer the title of Duke to you. From today onwards, you and your descendants will be the rightful rulers of this country. As the loser, I only have one small request, and that is, please let my family go." "And yourself?" asked Villiard with great interest. "Me?" Duke Xerxes too sighed helplessly. "I'm afraid I won't be able to escape this. After all, before the battle broke out, you announced that you only gave me 2 paths. One was to surrender unconditionally, and the other was death. Since I chose the latter, I naturally have to be responsible for my own choice. What's more, you need to prove to the world that you are a monarch who keeps his word. Only then can you win the respect and fear of everyone. Upon hearing this, Vilya could not help but smile. It seems that you're much smarter than the rumors say. You're also better at finding your own place in a complicated environment. More than 50% of the duchy's current status is due to you. Unfortunately, you've made a fatal mistake, which is to accidentally become my enemy. Although from a personal point of view, I am very willing to let you live. But as you said, sometimes a monarch should not put personal feelings into military and political affairs. Therefore you must die, and you will be put to death to prove that I am a queen who keeps her word. Only in this way will those potential enemies feel fear and not dare to treat my words lightly as wind. However, I won't kill your relatives and family. Instead, I'll give them a ship and send them far away from their homeland. After getting the result he wanted, Archduke Sith II immediately bowed again. Thank you very much. Although you are still very young, almost younger than my daughter, I can already feel all the qualities of a wise monarch from you. However, please be careful. The various countries on this continent will definitely not wish for an unrivaled overlord to appear. They will definitely secretly join forces to make a move on you and your country. Haha, then let them come. I will use my actions to prove that in the face of absolute power, all schemes and tricks will quickly dissipate like mist under the sun. Vilya pursed her lips, her tone full of playfulness. Perhaps to outsiders, this was a form of confidence, a performance of having a well-thought-out plan. However, only she knew that she was just a puppet placed at the front stage, a marionette, an agent. Those who wanted to defeat her did not know how terrifying the enemy they were facing was. It was terrifying enough to be comparable to, or even surpass, the gods. After the short conversation between the victor and the loser came to an end, Sith II's family was immediately sent onto a ship, while he himself was placed under house arrest. At the same time, the date of his execution was announced to the public. Without any concealment, Vilya wanted to use a bloody head to prove to the surrounding countries that were eyeing her covetously that she was an enemy that was not easy to deal with. Only in this way would she have enough time to integrate the internal affairs and eliminate the huge hidden dangers. Just as the saying went, war was the most perfect means of transferring conflicts. As long as victory was ensured, one would be able to obtain unimaginable personal prestige and the support of the people. From there, one could promote a series of reforms or complete the centralization of power. Obviously, compared to Kerwin, who had the tyrant attribute, Vilya was a relatively benevolent ruler who did not like to use violence to achieve her goals. If it were not for the fact that she could not disobey her master's orders, she would definitely not lead her country on the path of external expansion. Looking at the piles of urgent documents on the table that needed to be dealt with immediately, Vilya could not help but hold her forehead and complain, "Oh my God, when will all of this be done? I feel that if this goes on, I will be exhausted to death in a few years at most." Ha ha, my dear, I think you should start trying to cultivate some trusted subordinates and let them be in charge of handling official affairs. The responsibility and virtue of a ruler is never to do everything by himself, but to choose those who are both loyal and capable to assist in managing the country. Isolde, who was arranging when to walk into the room, laughed and suggested this suggestion. This old man who had just walked out of the Magic Tower's library exuded strong waves of energy all over his body. In the eyes of professionals, he was as dazzling as the sun. Even ordinary people could feel part of his power. "You are." Vilya, who obviously had some talent for magic, widened her eyes in shock. I went to a hall filled with knowledge not long ago and understood and learned new magic knowledge." Isolde's old face was filled with happiness and joy. Although this time he had only read less than 1/10,000th of the books in the library, he felt that he had surpassed 99% of the spellcasters on this continent. As long as he had another chance, he could even pry into the mystery of death and use the power of magic to greatly extend his life. Chapter 1095. Congratulations. Looks like you've gotten what you wanted, haven't you? Villiers stamped a piece of paper and tossed it to the maid beside her. Although she was still very inexperienced as the ruler of a country, she had gradually gained the aura of a monarch. Especially after completely occupying and annexing a neighboring country, the people around her had developed a certain level of respect for her. Although they appeared to be obedient on the surface, there was an inexplicable contempt in their hearts. They thought that a young princess had no prestige or ability to manage a crumbling country. Isolde was undoubtedly aware of this and immediately restrained his attitude. He placed one hand on his chest and bowed slightly. Yes, Your Majesty. But I also want to congratulate you on completing the first phase of the goal. I believe that Master will be very happy to hear this news. Perhaps your position in his heart will rise greatly, even surpassing Kerwin's. Are you being sarcastic? Perhaps on the surface, we all have identities that ordinary people would envy or even revere, but in reality, we're all just servants of Master. In his eyes, you and I are probably no different from insects that he could stomp to death with one foot. As she said this, a self-deprecating expression appeared on Villiers' face. There is no doubt that she had a very clear understanding of her current situation. She knew what was hidden behind countless facades and did not get carried away by this small victory. In a way, in terms of self-restraint, she was clearly much better than Kerwin. Ha ha, I'm very pleased that you can understand this. But don't be discouraged. At least Master is generous, and he will give us servants enough rewards. Look at me, and then look at islands. You'll find that he has no interest in worldly wealth, power. But to us, these things are incomparably precious, and are even worth gambling with our lives. Isolde laughed and spoke his truest thoughts. Life? For an old man, he knew very well that he did not have much time left to live. So gambling with his little remaining life in exchange for a way to extend his life or even escape death was a sure-win thing. However, Villiers was the opposite. She still had her beautiful youth and noble identity as a princess. If she had not been driven into a corner, she would not have chosen to become an agent and bring slaughter, destruction to the entire world. You're right. Master is indeed generous. I have never denied that. But you cannot ignore his strength and danger. I'm not even sure what's hidden under his appearance that's so similar to ours. As Villiers spoke, he stood up from his gem-encrusted chair and walked to the balcony. He looked down at the most prosperous city in the duchy. Even though the army under her command had basically completed the control of this country, for some reason, a strong sense of unease still hung in the depths of her heart like a dark cloud. Keep your curiosity to yourself. Don't try to pry into any of my master's secrets. That won't do you or me any good. Remember, the reason why Master needs you is not because of your identity, status, beauty, or anything else, but because he hates trouble and does not want to waste too much time and energy on these trivial matters. If one day you do something you shouldn't do, then please refer to Kerwin's ending. As chess pieces, none of us are irreplaceable, Isolde warned meaningfully. He had been young once, and he knew that young people could sometimes be foolish and be influenced by the so-called sense of justice, responsibility, and morality. In the end, they would act impulsively and do things that were not beneficial to themselves. However, as they grew older, these young people would one day understand that there was no such thing as justice in the world. Everything was not caused by benefits. Those seemingly righteous actions were, without exception, hiding a lot of dirty dealings behind them. As the saying went, benefits gave rise to motives, motives gave rise to thoughts, thoughts gave rise to actions, and actions would lead to disputes over benefits, forming an endless cycle. Almost everyone's every action revolved around the interests of their own interests. Villiers was not a fool. She knew that the old man in front of her was not joking. She nodded gently and said, "Of course. I won't be an idiot to touch the red line. All right, let's not talk about these disappointing things. Let's talk about what we should do next. Here, these are the diplomatic letters sent by the surrounding countries in the past few days. 3 of them are love letters and marriage invitations. What do you think I should do?" Having said that, she threw a few open letters on the table, her tone full of mockery. As a young and beautiful woman, as well as a queen with great power, she naturally understood the purpose of these love letters and marriage invitations. On the one hand, the monarchs hoped to use this method to test the attitude of the kingdom in their next move, so that they could make the corresponding preparations. On the other hand, they coveted her beauty and the powerful weapons, and hoped to use this method to plant spies and steal the detailed manufacturing methods. Isol took a quick glance at them, set them on fire, and threw them down from the balcony. They're afraid, but they should be afraid too. Ignore them and continue to do what you need to do. These fellows who are used to playing tricks will never understand that under the great power of Master, small tricks can't change the overall situation. Oh, you mean, Villiers seemed to have realized something, and a hint of joy flashed in her eyes. You guessed right. Master has asked me to bring a new army, an army that you can never imagine. With them, all threats will not be a problem. Isol took out a scroll and activated the magic stored in it. The next second, a gigantic teleportation gate was instantly opened. On the other side of the portal was a space completely formed by darkness, and the deepest part of the space was densely packed with humanoid creatures that flickered with silver light. They seemed to have no physical bodies, but in their hands were magical weapons. Even from far away, one could feel the power of these weapons. Villia cautiously approached the portal and pointed to the one at the front. Is this an army of ghosts? Ghosts? No, no, no. Isol smiled and shook his head. They are special life forms created by souls and death. They are creatures that are between a physical body and a spiritual body, and can freely change between the two forms. Do you know what this means? It means that ordinary weapons can't even cause the slightest bit of damage to them. My queen, you now have an army that is almost impossible to kill. Chapter 1096. While Villia was overjoyed by the sudden arrival of this army, Zhang Cheng was sitting at a table with Gru, who had come from afar, in a magical tower deep in the forest. As neither of them spoke, the atmosphere was rather stifling. After a few minutes, Gru, who looked like a beetle, sighed slightly and asked in a tired voice, "When do you plan to leave this planet and go where you should go?" "Where should I go?" Zhang Cheng asked casually. "You should know what I mean. Given the current chaotic situation, it's best for you to stay in a relatively safe place and not act alone. You should know that your location has been discovered by many rulers, and no one knows what kind of dangerous actions they will take." Gru's tone carried a strong warning. Unfortunately, Zhang Cheng was clearly not interested in this suggestion. He sneered and shook his head. "Dangerous? Do you think I'll be safe if I leave this planet?" "No. In terms of the relationship between motivation and action, as long as the motivation doesn't disappear, the danger will always exist. I've never been afraid of danger, and I won't choose to give in. I'll stay to complete the experiment and the little game with you. Unless there's a general of death, there's nothing that can stop me from doing what I want to do." "All right. Looks like you're more stubborn than I thought. However, please don't forget that you're still very weak. If you encounter a sudden attack, it's best for you to turn around and flee immediately instead of fighting a powerful opponent." Having said that, Gru stood up and chose to leave. He understood that rulers stood at the top of the evolution of life in this universe, so no one would think that they were wrong and others were right. On the contrary, they would often think that they were absolutely right and others were absolutely wrong. Therefore, trying to persuade a ruler to give up on their original plan had a chance of success. Gru didn't want to waste time. Instead of wasting time here, it was better to act elsewhere to reduce the risk as much as possible and ensure that his faction's advantage wouldn't be lost. Sensing the powerful force that belonged to the other party disappear from the three-dimensional universe, Zhang Cheng pursed his lips and muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear. "Escape? That's not my style. Besides, I still have a trump card that no one knows about. It's a trump card that can intimidate everyone." Just as he finished speaking, suddenly there was a knock on the door, followed by Islands' excited voice. "Master, I have evidence of Kerwin's betrayal." "Oh, come in and tell me what evidence you found," Zhang Cheng replied casually. To be honest, he did not have much interest in the scheming between his subordinates and servants. He only had the attitude of watching a monkey show. After all, one of the core essences of the existence of intelligent life was competition. Through fierce and cruel competition, the weak would be eliminated, and then the more adaptable ones would continue to evolve toward higher level. If a race eliminated internal competition and provided massive benefits to the weak to ensure that they could live and reproduce well, it wouldn't take long for the race to fall into endless chaos or even regression due to the violation of the most basic laws of life. Please look. These were the letters that he had secretly exchanged with the higher-ups of the surrounding countries. They seem to be planning to make a move on the other agent that you support. Islands said as he took out a thick stack of letters from his pocket. There was no need to ask to know that he had stolen these letters from the other party through magic. In order to make Kerwin pay a heavy price, he had deliberately schemed to get rid of this annoying enemy once and for all. That's all. Zhang Cheng took the letters and gave them a cursory glance before throwing them to the side. Is this not enough? Islands subconsciously frowned, his tone revealing doubt and confusion. In his eyes, this kind of private contact with other forces behind his master's back, and even the act of forming an alliance, was without a doubt a betrayal that should be immediately arrested and executed. However, Zhang Cheng replied indifferently, "No, of course it's not enough. It seems that you don't quite understand my intentions, nor do you understand the experiment I'm doing. Actually, whoever Kerwin forms an alliance with or becomes an enemy of mine doesn't affect my plan at all. As long as he continues to expand and maintain his insatiable ambition and desire, then he'll be a very good and useful chess piece. In comparison, I'm more worried about the queen who just ascended the throne. She hasn't abandoned her sense of kindness and responsibility and might try to disobey my orders at any time." "So you're saying that you don't mind Kerwin's actions at all?" The young man seemed to understand something, and a hazy expression appeared on his face. Why should I care? Can he be a threat to me? Does he have the right to be my enemy? No, he doesn't. He's just an ambitious person who grew up under my blessing, a tyrant who desires more power, land, and wealth. As long as I'm willing, I can crush him like a bug at any time. How long do you think this kind of rule that relies on violence and intimidation to maintain order will last if he suddenly dies one day? Believe me, when that time comes, you'll see a magnificent uprising and rebellion." Zhang Cheng explained meaningfully. Indeed, as long as a tyranny didn't do anything stupid and dared to kill anyone who challenged its power, whether it was hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, or hundreds of thousands of people, then it could always be maintained. This has been proven in some countries on Earth, especially the Spanish dictator in the 20th century, Francisco Franco, who was the best example of all tyrants. He used practical actions to prove that no matter how much internal and external pressure there was, or how many people wanted to oust him, as long as he firmly controlled the organization of violence, then all violent and non-violent resistance would be like mist under the sun, quickly dissipating. However, tyranny had a fatal flaw, and that was that it was almost impossible to pass it down to the next generation. This was because tyrants were tyrants because they had enough prestige to make the organization of violence obey their will. But their successors often lacked such prestige and were even more unable to suppress those who had made outstanding contributions. Therefore, once a tyrant died, the regime he established would quickly collapse, either causing internal chaos and power struggles, or the long-suppressed people at the bottom would use this opportunity to fight back. In short, tyranny needed a strong leader to maintain and not rely on seemingly powerful forces. Chapter 1097. I'm very sorry. It's my stupidity and ignorance that has caused you trouble. Islands bowed deeply with a face full of unwillingness. Obviously, he never dreamed that his master did not care about those little tricks in private and was not afraid of betrayal. It was laughable that his deliberate actions were like a clown or an idiot doing something that he thought was smart. But in reality, all his plans turned into bubbles in the end, and he could not hurt the enemy at all. Instead, it made him seem so low level. Shame, annoyance, anger, all kinds of intense emotions were constantly devouring the things called self-esteem and shame. Feeling the complex and contradictory thoughts in the young man's mind at this moment, Zhang Cheng could not help but smile and comfort him. You don't have to apologize. I never care about these small things, and I don't even mind my subordinates making mistakes. But there is one thing. I only allow each kind of mistake to be made once. If there is a second time, then I will choose to directly abandon it. Making mistakes is not terrible. What's terrible is that you can't learn from your mistakes. Please don't worry. I promise to learn from this mistake. Islands lowered his head and promised with gritted teeth. Nothing could make a young man feel unforgettable shame more than a complete failure. It would also arouse their subconscious competitive spirit, and they would be eager to use the next success to recover everything that they lost. Very good. Then continue to do what you should do. Remember, I have high expectations for you. Don't let me down or else. Zhang Cheng deliberately dragged the word and did not say the second half of the sentence. However, the meaning behind his words was self-evident. I swear on my life and soul that I will never let you down. After saying that, Islands took a deep breath and quickly turned to leave. Watching the young man's back gradually disappear, Zhang Cheng took a piece of paper from the table and quickly wrote a series of words of this world on it. Then, he ignited it and threw it out of the window. In an instant, the burning piece of paper suddenly turned into a burning firebird and soared into the sky, flying quickly towards the west. After doing all this, he said to himself expressionlessly, "It's time to speed up the progress and ensure that the whole plan can be completed before the crisis arrives. I hate being disturbed, and I hate any unexpected situations even more." Just as he finished speaking, Zhang Cheng raised his hand and tore through space, allowing himself to easily traverse time and space and appear in the middle of the wasteland where the chaos seed was. Fear, despair, death, hatred, pain. I didn't expect that in such a short period of time, this power has already started to grow and affect the surrounding plants and animals. It won't be long before this planet gives birth to a consciousness, a chaotic consciousness. Accompanied by a meaningful whisper, he gently cut his finger and let the blood that emitted a dark light drip onto the ground. Just one drop. The remaining wraiths in the wasteland began to howl crazily. That terrifying sound even killed all living things within a radius of tens of kilometers. But when the fatal screams stopped, these wraiths plunged into the ground and quickly turned into an unknown substance before finally gathering together. About half an hour later, an indescribably twisted tree broke out of the ground and grew at a speed visible to the naked eye, only stopping when all the unknown substance was exhausted. It was so huge, just the trunk alone was more than 200 meters tall. The bark on the surface of the trunk was like a human face, making one's hair stand on end. What's more, it would make a terrifying sound when touched. But the most interesting thing was that the canopy above the trunk was emitting a positive energy full of light and heat. Most people who saw this scene would probably feel a sense of absurdity and strangeness that they had never felt before. Just like how justice was born from evil, justice gave birth to evil. It had to be said that this extremely strange tree happened to be the perfect embodiment of chaos. When it inserted its roots into the planet's core, it would immediately receive an endless supply of energy, eventually replacing the planet itself and becoming the source that supported this world. At the same time, all life on this planet would uncontrollably distort, becoming more and more disorderly, filled with countless phenomena that could not be explained by common sense. How perfect! You will be my most outstanding creation so far. Grow up quickly. I look forward to seeing what this planet will become when you return. After saying this sentence full of anticipation, Zhang Cheng quickly disappeared from where he was. Less than 5 minutes after he left, a group of people dressed as adventurers came out of the forest behind him. When they saw the giant tree standing in the middle of the wasteland, they seemed to have gone mad, standing still and not daring to move. This was because there was an extremely crazy voice that kept echoing in everyone's mind. Every time it repeated a sentence, these adventurers would feel their thoughts and logic all fall into chaos, and their bodies would start to do some inexplicable actions uncontrollably. Two muscular warriors even pulled out their swords and started a fight to the death, not caring even if they were bleeding all over. Their eyes flickered with a crazy and bloodthirsty light, simply seeing each other as enemies that would not rest until they were dead. "Damn it! Leave quickly. There's something wrong with this tree." The only person in the group who was still clear-headed warned loudly. Unfortunately, it was discovered too late. Before he could run a few steps, his own spiritual defense was also broken, and he sat directly on the ground and laughed like a madman, unable to stop himself. In the end, he laughed himself to death. The other few people were not much better. The two warriors who were fighting to the death were both seriously injured and lying in a pool of blood. They would lose too much blood in a few minutes at most and become cold corpses. The remaining few people were either cutting their own flesh with a knife or crying and laughing hysterically. The result was not unexpected. This group of adventurers completely died under the influence of the giant tree of chaos, without even a chance to report. It should be known that because a war had broken out here before, there were many broken weapons and armors left on the ground. Some scavengers and adventurer teams would spare no effort to rush over and collect those things that could still be recycled and used to make money to support their families. But now, any person or animal that came close to this place could not expect to leave alive. Under the influence of the power of chaos, even the gods would be uncontrollably trapped and unable to extricate themselves, not to mention the mortals who had no power to resist. The only thing they could do was to become a sacrifice under the control of chaos. Chapter 1098. With the entire planet's core as its nourishment, the tree of chaos grew at an unbelievable speed. It didn't take long for its towering tree trunk to attract the curious gazes of countless people. Even the nearby countries began to become nervous. They commissioned adventurers or sent out search teams to investigate. In the end, without exception, everyone who entered the area would go crazy for no reason. Some even became mysterious and kept saying things that normal people couldn't understand. Only a few lucky ones who didn't get too close managed to escape and told their clients what they had seen with their own eyes. All of a sudden, all kinds of guesses and doomsday prophecies sprung up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. Even the priests who claimed to serve the gods came forward and made some statements about faith. They claimed that this was a warning from the gods to the mortals. In short, almost everyone was trying to make use of this thing that they couldn't understand or profit from. No one knew that an unprecedented upheaval was happening on this planet. Once the tree of chaos engulfed the entire planet, all life on this planet would go through an irreversible change. Unfortunately, up until now, no one had really taken it seriously. They only saw it as a potential threat. After all, the place where the tree of chaos grew was neither a transportation hub nor an important town. It was just an uninhabited wasteland. Basically, no country's upper echelons would care about such worthless land. It seems that only focusing on short-term benefits is a common problem for almost all intelligent life. To think that they can ignore something like the tree of chaos that can destroy a planet. I really overestimated them. Zhang Cheng stared at the image transmitted by the magic mirror, stroked his chin, and muttered to himself. He originally thought that when this tree took root and sprouted, it would cause a rather intense reaction. However, the interesting thing was that after confirming that the danger wouldn't spread in all directions for the time being, the neighboring countries all chose to turn a blind eye to it. Such short-sightedness. He was deceiving himself and others. They were no different from the humans on Earth. However, there was also an advantage to this. He could save on the means that he had originally prepared and let the tree of chaos complete its transformation unknowingly. By the time the natives on this planet reacted, it would probably be too late. They wouldn't be able to salvage their tragic future. At that time, a generation, or even several generations, would fall into endless pain and despair until their descendants gradually adapted to the new environment, becoming part of the chaos from their bodies to their souls. Just as the saying went, environmental changes were the most fatal. It was enough to make a race disappear completely or turn into a different race from its roots. According to the inevitable outcome of biological evolution, it was either adaptation or elimination. There was no third option. In addition, the most basic instinct of living creatures was to ensure that their species could survive and reproduce. Therefore, self-destruction was definitely not the choice of most ordinary people of the middle and lower class. This also meant that no matter how harsh the living environment was, there was no way they could survive. They would do their best to keep their descendants alive. Unfortunately, they would never know that to a certain extent, their descendants were no longer the same as them. Instead, they were completely different creatures. Transforming a planet that was completely dominated by chaos was obviously not an easy task. Not only did it require a lot of energy, but it also had to ensure that the entire process would not be interrupted by external forces. After all, although the Tree of Chaos was an almost indestructible colossus in the eyes of mortals, there were too many powerful individuals in the vast and boundless universe that could threaten its growth. Zhang Cheng did not wish for anything to interrupt this process. He would not allow anything to disrupt the entire plan, let alone the growth of the Tree of Chaos. Therefore, he would not choose to leave no matter what. Just as he was silently watching the Tree of Chaos absorb the planet's energy and grow, Kerwin had quietly left his territory. He disguised himself as a merchant and brought a few loyal subordinates to a small border city in a neighboring country. Due to the frequent wars that had broken out recently, many troops that had just been transferred over could be seen here. There were also countless defensive structures that were being built. There were no smiles on the people's faces, let alone so-called happiness. There was only nervousness, panic, and uneasiness. If it weren't for the lack of money, they would have fled this place long ago and gone to a relatively safer city. Interesting. They're preparing for the upcoming war here. I wonder if the enemy they're preparing to deal with will be me or the queen who caused such a huge commotion not long after her ascension. Kerwin muttered to himself with a cold smile. Without a doubt, such an atmosphere suited his taste very well. If he was going to deal with Vilya, it meant that he had gained a decent ally. At the very least, he could use them as cannon fodder and sacrifice during crucial moments. However, if they were going to deal with him, it meant that his strength had been acknowledged by the neighboring nations. Announcing his coronation and establishing a nation shouldn't be too much of a problem. My lord, I suggest you be careful. No matter what, this isn't within our sphere of influence. If they choose to betray you, there might be an assassination attempt. Baron Kellist, who had been following him closely, reminded him in a low voice. Kerwin waved his hand nonchalantly. Relax, my baron. Those rats hiding in the shadows don't have the guts to do so. Remember, while schemes can often produce unexpected results, what ultimately decides the relationship between two sides is still power. Absolute power. As long as I'm strong enough, anyone who wants to assassinate me will have to bear the risk of failure. I've never doubted your judgment. However, the problem is that not everyone in this world can maintain their rationality. There are many arrogant idiots who think they're infallible. According to my experience, their actions are often unpredictable, Baron Kellist explained as he scanned the surroundings with his two eyes. His hand never left the hilt of his sword. The moment something happened, he would be able to draw his weapon within a second and stop any enemy who charged at him. There's no need to predict. I'm not as weak as you think. Let's go. Don't let the people who invited us wait too long. They don't have much patience. Having said that, Kerwin pulled his hood tightly to cover his face and quickly entered a dark alley. He kicked away a beggar who tried to ask for money and entered an inconspicuous little tavern around the corner. Chapter 1099. Similar to most taverns in the slums, this tavern was filled with all sorts of pungent smells, as well as the cheap perfume of women in the service industry. Those drunkards who didn't have much money were crazily drinking inferior wine that had been spiked with unknown substances. There were also some who were drunk and vomiting in a corner from time to time, while turning around to talk and laugh with the other drunkards without restraint. In the dark corridor, there were even 2 or 3 couples who had negotiated a price. They were hugging each other and doing some exercise that was beneficial to their physical and mental health. It could be said that anyone with even the slightest bit of status would never allow themselves to enter such a trashy place. However, what was interesting was that on the second floor of the tavern, there were a few people who didn't seem to fit in with the surroundings. This was especially true for the bearded man in the lead. He gave off the aura of a superior, so much so that even the troublemakers didn't dare to approach him. As for the reason, it was very simple. Beside him, there was a hand that had been cut off and was lying on the ground. Dazzling red blood covered the ground. Based on the amount of blood lost and the medical conditions that the commoners of this world could enjoy, the chances of survival were no more than 10%. After carefully observing these people, Kerwin stepped forward and greeted them with a smile. "Good evening, dear friends. If I'm not wrong, you should be waiting for someone, right?" "That's right. We are waiting for someone, and that person is you." The bearded man lifted his hood slightly, revealing a slightly aged but dignified face. He was none other than the supreme ruler of this land, King Harrison, known as the Lion of Orlos. No one in the entire continent would have thought that a powerful ruler with great prestige and outstanding military achievements, who had once led his country to expand its territory, would have a private meeting with a notorious tyrant in a tavern in the slums. "Good afternoon, Your Majesty. It is an honor to be recognized by you. In comparison, there probably aren't many rulers on this continent that you care about." Kerwin sat down, picked up the cup, and gulped down all the alcohol. For some reason, he had clearly received strict etiquette training, but at this moment, he put on a rude appearance, causing a female guard beside him to frown. However, Harrison didn't mind that. He nodded with a smile. "You're right. I am a proud man, but I am also a strict and demanding ruler. In my eyes, those mediocre monarchs who succeeded their fathers and worked hard to build the country are not worthy of standing beside me. But you're different. Your surging ambition makes me feel surprised and afraid. Apart from you, the young queen is also a very powerful person. She actually managed to save the country from the brink of destruction." "Are you praising me?" Calvin put down the wine glass and wiped his mouth with his sleeve as he probed with a faint smile. "Praise? No, I'm just stating a fact. Both you and her are a threat to me, and the threat is not small. Of course, she's a bigger threat than you. After all, the power of that weapon has been proven on the battlefield. I really can't think of any way to defend against such a terrifying thing. How about it? Are you interested in working with me to find a way to create that weapon? I know that you've always wanted to change your lowly background. So, as long as you agree, I'm willing to marry my beloved daughter to you as your wife. I'll even support your coronation and establish a valuation." The scheming Harrison cast his gaze at the young and beautiful woman beside him and calmly laid out his conditions. His words were filled with undisguised temptation. In contrast, the young woman with long blonde hair and wearing silver armor that was more decorative than practical had a livid expression. Her eyes were shooting out flames of fury that could devour a person. It was obvious that she hadn't received any news beforehand and didn't know that the purpose of her trip was a marriage alliance. Of course, the most important thing wasn't the marriage alliance. It was that the person she was going to marry didn't match her expectations of a husband. Kerwin wasn't ugly, but he wasn't handsome either. At most, he was below average. Furthermore, he was greedy, lecherous, and unscrupulous in his actions for power. No matter how one looked at it, he didn't seem like someone worth entrusting her life to. Unfortunately, as a princess of the royal family, it was impossible for her to freely choose her marriage. Her only value was that when her father needed her, she would marry someone who was worth roping in. She would offer her youth and beauty in exchange for an alliance with the other party. "You plan to marry the princess to me?" Kerwin raised his eyebrows in surprise. He glanced at the princess, who seemed to have lost control of her emotions, out of the corner of his eye. Harrison nodded seriously and replied unhurriedly, "That's right. As long as you agree to marry my daughter and make the firstborn boy your heir, I will fulfill my promise. From then on, your country and my country will be closely linked, be it in terms of blood, politics, or military. I believe you understand what it means to have my support." Kerwin sighed with a smile. "How could I not know? You are the Lion of Orlos, and you defeated the combined attack of 3 kingdoms by yourself. You even defeated them, took away large amounts of land from them, and turned them into your vassals. Your achievements in politics and military are like a textbook for kings. I've always worked hard with you as my goal. Being able to gain your favor is definitely the happiest thing in my life. Ha ha, you sure know how to talk. So what's your answer? Harrison's eyes were filled with strong anticipation. In his opinion, the chances of Kerwin choosing the same option were almost 100%. There was no reason to refuse. Sorry, my answer is no, because agreeing to your conditions might seem like I'm taking advantage of you, but in reality, you're reaching your hands into my internal affairs. I'm a very sensitive person to power, and I won't allow anyone to share it. This princess might be young and beautiful and exudes an irresistible temptation, but power is even more tempting to me. If you die one day, I'll be more than happy to marry your daughter. But as long as you're alive, I won't marry you. That's the same as letting you hold a dagger to my heart. When he said this, Kerwin's face didn't show any hesitation. At the same time, he exuded the cruelty and tyranny that only belonged to a tyrant. Wonderful Bookhouse. Chapter 1100. The court was always a place full of schemes and calculations, especially on this continent where bloodlines and feudalism were the main ruling structure. Wives could often enjoy some of the rights that their sons and husbands enjoyed. Some powerful women could even seize power and financial power from their sons and husbands, eventually turning them into their own puppets or puppets. Some were even more direct, abolishing their husbands and sons and stepping onto the stage themselves. This was especially true when the wife's family had great political influence or came from the royal family of a powerful country. The probability of such a situation happening was almost 50%. To some extent, marriage was not only a political and military alliance, but also a game between two allies. In the end, the party with the upper hand would even have the opportunity to swallow the weaker party. However, in the eyes of most nobles, this kind of bloodline merger was acceptable. Unfortunately, the ambitious and lowly Kerwin did not want to be swallowed at all, nor was he willing to give away part of his power. This was because he knew very well that even though he had an absolute and crushing advantage in the military, he was still too weak in the political aspect. He was so weak that even the people in the areas under his control did not recognize him as the actual ruler. Instead, they still insisted on calling themselves the people of the kingdom. It would probably take at least 1 or 2 generations to change this. In such an environment, not to mention marrying a powerful and famous monarch, it was tantamount to inviting a wolf into one's house. Even though Kerwin did not think that a mere young princess could take away much power from him, the problem was that many people who were still hesitating would rather choose to be loyal to her than to him. Over time, this legal wife would gather more and more forces around her. Regardless of whether she had such thoughts or not, she would be forced to be involved in the power struggle. Do you know what it means to reject me? Harrison narrowed his eyes, a hint of threat in his tone. It had been a long time since he met someone who dared to reject him, regardless of whether the other party was a monarch of a country or a general with great military achievements under his command. What? Are you planning to lead an army to declare war on me? Or are you just going to condemn me verbally, a traitor and tyrant? No, you're a completely mercenary monarch. You wouldn't do such a stupid thing. On the contrary, your biggest threat is the legitimate and righteous Villia, so you will form an alliance with me no matter what. At least before we get rid of our common enemy, there will be no conflict between us. Kerwin pursed his lips slightly, a smug expression appearing on his face. This was also the main reason why he was willing to take such a huge risk to come here. Obviously, before he figured out Zhang Cheng's true thoughts, he did not dare to act rashly. The only way was to find someone he could abandon at any time, or a cannon fodder who would stab him in the back to complete the test. However, Harrison did not know any of that. Instead, he felt that he was the one in control and had the upper hand. Therefore, after pondering for a moment, he immediately pretended to laugh loudly. Ha 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 ha. Good. Very good. You're one of the few people in this world who dares to speak to me like this. I admire your ambition. Of the world, of the world, of the world, of the world, world, of the 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 world, if you think marrying my daughter is risky, you could choose to get engaged first and hold the wedding when I am about to die. You have to know that nothing is more reassuring than a bloodline fusion. Since you have already put it this way, wouldn't it be too ungrateful of me to still reject you? All right, I agree to your request. Now, can we talk about the specifics of how you plan to deal with Vilya? After all, she is no longer the naive and ignorant princess from before, but an extremely dangerous opponent. Kerwin did not plan to dwell on this issue for too long. He decisively went straight to the point. As for the marriage and what kind of woman he married, he had never cared about it. To him, the opposite sex was not so much a partner as a tool to vent his desires and reproduce, as long as she was beautiful and healthy. I heard that you once held her captive. Why did you let her go later? Harrison did not give him his plan directly. Instead, he took the initiative to ask a very important question. Needless to say, like many people, was very curious about what had happened back then that made a princess with the title of a vase suddenly change overnight. Not only did she launch a coup to replace her father, but she also annexed a neighboring duchy at lightning speed. I'm sorry. This is a private matter between the two of us. I can't go into too much detail with you. You only need to know that she has the support of a powerful existence. But fortunately, this powerful existence will not directly interfere with the fights between ordinary people, so you don't have to worry too much about any trouble after getting rid of Vilya. Kerwin gave a half-truth answer. In fact, even he was not sure how Zhangcheng would react if Vilya was killed or kicked out of power. Oh, you mean there's a mysterious person hiding in the background? Harrison raised his eyebrows and looked into Kerwin's eyes, trying to find some unusual information in them. As a veteran of playing politics and conspiracies, it was not difficult for him to guess with his intelligence that Kerwin could rise so quickly because of this mysterious person's support. But the question was, why would this mysterious person choose to support a kingdom that was on the verge of destruction? What happened between him and Kerwin? What kind of unspeakable secret or conspiracy was hidden behind all this? Kerwin sensed this silent probing and sighed helplessly. Sigh, I can't give you an accurate answer, but I can give you a little hint. He's different from us. Don't try to infer his motives with your own thoughts. In his eyes, all the power, wealth, beauty, and glory in the world are not worth mentioning. Looks like you're very familiar with this mysterious person. I wonder if you can introduce me to him? Harrison took the initiative to make a request. Haha, you seem to have misunderstood something. You know what? Neither Vilya nor I have the right to ask him to do anything. He gave us the order directly, and we have to complete it to the letter. Otherwise, this person will pay the price for his arrogance and stupidity. As he said this, Kelvin's eyes flashed with an imperceptible hint of regret. He knew that Vilya's rise was precisely because he was complacent and had thoughts that he should not have. That was why Isolde had left him, afraid that he would be implicated. Chapter 1101. Because Kerwin had purposely leaked a lot of insider information, Harrison had agreed to the alliance in the end, prioritizing dealing with Vilya, who seemed to be the biggest threat. However, in exchange, the former had to announce his engagement to the public and introduce himself to that mysterious person when the time was right. It could be said that both parties felt that they had gotten what they wanted from this alliance. However, because of the asymmetry of information, one party was unknowingly used by the other. When Harrison left the dirty tavern with his entourage and came to the main road of the border town, the princess, who had been looking terrible, finally could not help but ask, "Father, are you really going to marry me to that dirty, ugly guy? Don't forget, he's a shameless traitor. He has neither glory nor history to show for it." "Why, do you look down on him?" Harrison stopped and looked at his daughter with interest. "That's right. I look down on him, despise him. I'd rather go to a monastery and become a priest to serve the gods than marry such trash." The princess did not hesitate to use a strong tone to express the anger and dissatisfaction in her heart. She had always thought that her future husband, even if not a handsome prince, would at least be a mature king or duke who could give her the love and care she craved. However, the cruel reality shattered all her fantasies. She realized that the person she was going to marry was not only not handsome, but also hideous and ugly. In terms of age, he was almost old enough to be her father. Most importantly, his reputation was extremely bad. The thought of sharing a bed with such a person, or even spending the rest of her life with him, made her want to kill herself. Unfortunately, Harrison's thoughts were the exact opposite of his daughter's. He smiled and explained, "No, my dear, you only see the surface and not the essence. I admit that Kerwin's appearance is not good, but he's not as bad as you describe him to be. On the contrary, he rose from a remote town and is more outstanding than most of the kings of today's countries. He knows how to protect the power in his hands. However, this is not the reason why I'm marrying you to him. My real goal is to let you give birth to a legitimate heir for him, and then inherit all his land and property after he dies. You want to use me to take away everything he has, just like what you did to the other 2 countries, and make my son a puppet?" The princess was obviously furious. She clenched her fists and stared at her father. She would never forget how her 2 sisters had become victims of politics and how they could not even protect their sons. They could only watch helplessly as they were controlled without any freedom. What was more, the only thing they could do in the future was to obey the arrangements. If they showed any signs of resistance, they would be severely punished immediately. If they did not know what was good for them, Harrison would definitely not mind letting his grandson meet with an accident and get a more obedient son. Kinship was never a necessity for a ruler who was determined to expand his territory and establish his career. Instead, it was a spice of life. It was naturally better to have it, but it didn't matter if he didn't have it. A family was... No, how could that be? Kerwin doesn't have a huge family behind him. He doesn't even have any decent relatives. Once you marry him and give birth to a legitimate heir, you can get half the kingdom's land and a crown. Believe me, you'll understand my intentions when you see his legendary army with your own eyes. Apart from that, I'm very interested in the mysterious person he mentioned." Harrison cleverly avoided the sharpest part of the conflict between the 2 of them and changed the topic. As a person with high emotional intelligence, he knew that he could not provoke his daughter's sensitive nerves at this time. Instead, he had to do his best to comfort her and ensure that there would be no accidents in his plan. "Consider for me? Huh, that's the funniest joke I've heard in my life. Since when have you considered for us? You're only using us as tools to fulfill your ambitions." The princess exploded, mercilessly exposing her father's hypocritical mask. It was the first time in her life that she had been so angry. At the same time, she understood why none of her siblings thought that this man was a qualified father. "My dear, calm down. I'm your father. How can I not think for my beloved daughter? It's just that you children will inevitably enter the rebellious phase. You won't understand my good intentions. After all, there's nothing more important than power and wealth in this world. Everything I do is to help you obtain them." Harrison's tone was full of sincerity when he said that. His eyes also revealed the kindness of father. But it was a pity that his acting skills didn't fool the young princess. The latter merely sneered and left alone. Watching his daughter's back gradually disappear, Harrison could not help but sigh with a smile. "She's not the first child to rebel against my decision, and I believe she won't be the last. It's okay. I'm used to it. What do you think? Your Majesty, you've indeed gone overboard this time. I don't think there's a need to marry Kelvin. He's not worthy of the noble bloodline of the royal family, and he's not worthy of the young and beautiful princess." An older guard expressed his opinion in a low voice. "No, you don't understand. Kerwin is not as simple as you think. I have a feeling that the mysterious person he mentioned earlier must be very, very powerful. If we can establish a friendship or an alliance with him, then we can become the supreme overlords of this continent. Think about it. When I give an order, no country will dare to defy me. What kind of great undertaking will that be?" Harrison opened his arms, his eyes blazing with desire. Similar to Kerwin, he was also an ambitious person. The only difference was that he was born into a royal family. He had a noble bloodline and the right to inherit. Therefore, what he did was no different from Kerwin. What was more interesting was that as time passed, he felt more and more that Kerwin was simply another him. Interacting with such a person gave this powerful monarch an inexplicable sense of pleasure. Even though it was hard for him to describe his feelings, he enjoyed the whole process very much. It was as if he was looking at his younger self. Chapter 1102. The marriage alliance between the top nobles was always something that everyone paid attention to. This meant that a new alliance would be established, and the current balance would be broken. It also meant that the benefits would be redistributed. This was especially true for a monarch as famous as Harrison. The news of his daughter marrying someone was like a magnitude 12 earthquake that quickly spread throughout the surrounding kingdoms. Even though it was only an engagement, the marriage partner was the infamous tyrant Kerwin. It was important to note that more than 90% of the nobles did not like this person who had broken the existing order and started a rebellion. They did not want their vassals to have similar thoughts. Therefore, it was not a coincidence that Kerwin became the target of everyone's disdain. It was the suppression of the challengers by the vested interest groups. Unfortunately, this challenger's strength was too strong, so they didn't dare to use force easily. They could only condemn him verbally. The bolder ones would at most secretly support the rebel organizations and create some chaos. Apart from that, no one dared to provoke the tyrant. Otherwise, they would be the unlucky ones. However, what was interesting was that when this news spread to the kingdom, Villia did not panic like those so-called important ministers. Instead, she laughed loudly. Ha ha, he's scared. He's actually scared of me. Scared? One of the nobles frowned subconsciously. It was obvious that he did not understand why the queen on the throne was laughing. What made him think that the damned traitor was scared? That's right. Villia nodded confidently. Kerwin is not the kind of person who would choose to ally with another ambitious person when he has the upper hand. On the contrary, his lowly birth has always caused his foundation to be unstable. Unless it's absolutely necessary, he will never allow anyone to reach into his territory, let alone a marriage alliance. The Lion of Orlos is no ordinary monarch. Anyone who isn't an idiot can feel his strong desire to become the ruler of the continent. Your Majesty, I have to remind you that if these two are married, our neighboring countries may all turn hostile. Be it in terms of strategy or diplomacy, we will be isolated and without help. The noble's tone was serious as they spoke of the outcome that he was most worried about. After all, in his impression, the confrontation between countries was essentially a combination of military power and diplomacy. Right now, the kingdom's military might was abnormally strong, to the point that it was a little unbelievable. However, if the kingdom's diplomacy fell into a passive state, it would definitely lead to a siege. However, Villia did not show any signs of worry. Instead, he replied casually, "Alone and without help? No, you don't understand at all. They're the ones who are isolated and helpless." "I don't understand what you mean." The noble's eyes were filled with confusion. Not only him, but almost everyone in the hall had the same reaction. "Don't ask if you don't understand. That will make you look foolish. Remember, do what you have to do. Let the queen make the important decisions herself." Isolde reprimanded them mercilessly. The nobleman's face flushed red, but when he thought of the powerful magical power of the old man in front of him, he didn't say the insulting words in the end. However, just because he restrained himself didn't mean that the other party would do the same. Isolde stood up and walked down the stairs, an imperceptible light flashing in his eyes. The next second, the nobles felt an indescribable sense of oppression, as if they were being stared at by a terrifying dragon. They fell to their knees with a thud, their bodies trembling uncontrollably. They screamed, help. Someone come and save me. Oof, what a cowardly idiot. Your Majesty, I think you should change your advisor. The old man smiled contemptuously. Damn it, how dare you use magic on a noble in this sacred place? Seeing that his colleague was being humiliated, Another person immediately stood up and tried to defend the dignity and pride of the nobles. Ever since the new queen ascended the throne, their status and power had been declining day by day. Now, they only had the right to advise, and the resentment and dissatisfaction in their hearts were about to boil over. If it weren't for the fact that they had lost their greatest reliance, the army, they would have started a rebellion long ago and helped the old king ascend the throne, restoring the ideal state where the royal family and the great nobles ruled together. Of course, this idea could only remain in their minds for now, and no one dared to put into action. Even if they had such intentions, the old king wouldn't agree, especially now that the kingdom was flourishing and had begun to reverse its disadvantages, stepping onto the stage of history with a new attitude. Magic? What do you have to say that I used magic? Where's the evidence? Framing someone is not a small crime, and I even have enough reason to invite you to a duel. Isolde threatened meaningfully. He wasn't joking and really wanted to teach these nobles a lesson. He wanted them to understand that times had changed and that it would take generations to climb to a high position. On the contrary, in this era of drastic changes, as long as one had talent, they would quickly be recognized and promoted. Take the kingdom as an example. In the war that had broken out not long ago, a large number of civilian officers were promoted from the grassroots, while the nobles who lacked experience and ability were cruelly eliminated, causing many families to lose face. It wouldn't be long before these officers would gradually squeeze the living space of the nobles and achieve the goal of complete centralization and complete control of the entire country. Villia had read the book on how to centralize power and transform a country into a military empire, so he didn't stop the old man from humiliating the nobles. He rested his chin on one hand and enjoyed the show with great interest. In contrast, the nobles in the hall all felt a strong chill. They weren't fools, and they knew how unfavorable the current situation was for them. They also knew that the loss of power would become more and more serious as the queen's reign continued. For a moment, the atmosphere began to become strange. Although no other noble spoke, they all stood behind the palace nobles, and there was no lack of dukes among them. It was clear that a sudden conflict in the palace had broken out at this particular moment. Chapter 11:03. What are you trying to do? Isolde pursed his lips, a dangerous glint flashing in his eyes. If it was in the past, he would definitely choose to retreat when faced with such a strong counterattack from the nobles. Although most spellcasters were powerful, they were far from invincible. As long as there were enough elite cannon fodder, they could still exhaust the opponent's magic and capture or kill them. But now, he didn't care about numbers. As long as he wanted to, he could raze the entire city to the ground at any time, not to mention the few guards and private armies left in the nobles' hands. The only thing he had to consider was how much of a negative impact killing so many nobles would have on the kingdom's rule, especially the serious lack of qualified bureaucrats, which had always been the biggest problem in this world. It would take decades or even centuries to slowly establish a perfect training system. Before that, the nobles were irreplaceable. Only they could maintain the stability of a country and ensure that there would not be frequent riots and upheavals. The nobles who had monopolized knowledge and power for a long time were undoubtedly aware of this point, so for a long time, they were fearless. Some of the more powerful nobles could even take over the royal family, and then through poisoning, marriage, alliances, and other means, they could finally send their descendants to the throne. It could be said that in the inherent understanding of the nobles, they were the true masters of this world. They were born with nobility, and even those temples with countless believers couldn't really threaten their position. But now, as the queen began to cultivate the commoners, they finally felt an unprecedented sense of crisis. This sudden outburst was not so much a dissatisfaction with the current political environment, but a fear of the future. They were afraid that one day, they would be replaced by a new class. What do we want to do? No. What do you want to do? From the day you entered the palace, the kingdom has been bleeding. Countless noble families who shed blood for this country have been humiliated and expelled, and those lowly commoners have stolen the position that originally belonged to them. Is this fair? And just now, you even tarnished the last dignity and glory of the nobles. We have had enough. If the kingdom no longer needs the support of the nobles, please say so directly, and we will leave on our own." The palace nobles, standing in the middle of the hall, undoubtedly felt the great power that had gathered. They instantly became tough, and, at the same time, they didn't forget to look at the young queen on the throne. Obviously, the target of his demonstration was Isolde on the surface, but in reality, he was targeting Villia, who supported all of this. "Oh, leave? Are you planning to give up your lands and titles? How many people are willing? Step forward and let me see." Villia raised his finger and tapped the table lightly. His tone did not reveal the slightest bit of nervousness or panic. Needless to say, she did not intend to give in when faced with the noble's coercion. Instead, she wanted to use this opportunity to establish her authority and deal with the most disobedient fellows, permanently stripping them of their titles and territories. Once they lost these two things, the nobles would lose their foundation and could no longer be called nobles. Perhaps in the first 1 or 2 generations, they could barely maintain the dignity of nobility by relying on their various relatives. However, it wouldn't be long before they were gradually excluded from the circle and reduced to ordinary people. Following the queen's unyielding attitude, the nobles in the hall were caught in a dilemma. On the one hand, they were not sure if this was just a threat or if it was real. On the other hand, if it was real, then should they give up the family property that their ancestors had worked so hard to build? Just as many nobles were unwilling to take the huge risk and continue to intensify the conflict, the palace nobles suddenly took a step forward, bowed slightly, and said in a righteous tone, "Your Majesty, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. I'm willing. If you insist on pushing the kingdom into the abyss of eternal damnation, please allow me and my family to leave. I'm willing too. Me too. If the kingdom is still a kingdom of nobles, I'd rather serve the monarchs of other countries." In an instant, at least 1/3 of the nobles followed closely behind, clearly expressing their strong dissatisfaction. However, 2/3 of the nobles remained silent for the time being. This was especially so for the dukes who still kept their large territories. They simply looked at the young queen who had come to power through the coup, wanting to see what choice she would make. Would she compromise with the nobles in exchange for the stability of the kingdom? Or would she choose to forcefully take back the territories of these nobles, even if it would cause part of the kingdom to fall into chaos and disorder? Just like the saying went, in this kind of extremely dangerous game, those who charged at the front would always be the cannon fodder that was bewitched and used, while the real mastermind would always hide behind and calmly observe the situation. Only when he was sure that he had a high chance of winning would he personally enter the battlefield. If they realized that they could not win, then they would quickly adjust their strategy or reach an agreement with the opponent or directly surrender with conditions. They would never bet all their lives on the line. Admiring the nobles in front of her who thought that they could change the monarch's mind with their numbers, Villia smiled contemptuously and announced directly, "Very good. Then, as the queen, I declare that your oath of allegiance to me is now rescinded. I'll give you 1 month to hand over your territories and leave the kingdom." What? The leading palace noble widened his eyes, unable to believe what he had heard. Not only him, but the originally noisy hall also suddenly became completely silent. Shock, fear, despair. Not many people could believe that the queen would dare to clear out 1/3 of the nobles in the palace. Although these nobles generally did not have high titles, their political influence was not small at all. Many positions in the army had been held by them for generations. What? Did you not hear clearly? Then I'll repeat it again. As the queen, I declare that from now on, your oath of allegiance to me is rescinded. I'll give you 1 month to pack your things, hand over your titles and lands, and then you can go wherever you want. But if anyone still refuses to leave after a month, don't worry. I'll treat you as a rebel. Villia glanced at the interesting expressions on the faces of the nobles below the throne and issued an ultimatum without hesitation. In fact, long before the end of the war, she had already begun to plan how to clear out some of the nobles and make room for the commoners who had been promoted by her. But who would have thought that before she could do anything, these idiots would jump out of their own accord and present her with a perfect excuse. It was the nobles who had proposed to leave the kingdom, not her own initiative to expel them, so she did not have to bear the corresponding political risks. The Wonderful Book House. Chapter 1104. Without a doubt, Villia's cold declaration in the palace had forced the nobles into a corner. After the meeting was adjourned, the nobles who had been stripped of their titles and territories gathered in a villa, staring at each other with gloomy expressions. After a full minute, the nobleman who had spoken in the palace spoke first. "Esteemed lords, I believe you have all seen that the kingdom is no longer the kingdom that was ruled by the nobles and the royal family. The woman sitting on the throne now is a madwoman who came to power through a coup. She is no different from the traitor Kerwin. Now, she is not even willing to give us the most basic respect and power. She even wants to destroy our foundation. So, what are you trying to say?" Another old man questioned loudly in annoyance. It was obvious that he was worried about how to explain to his wife and children that he was no longer a noble and that he had to move out of the castle that he had lived in for generations within a month. Of course, he was not the only one who was troubled. Almost every noble present had a troubled expression. They still could not believe that they had lost everything in a single night. What I mean is, since the kingdom is no longer ours, we have no obligation to continue protecting it. Why don't we work with its enemy? The nobleman suggested. Conspiracies and betrayals were always closely related to politics. This was especially true for nobles who lived under a feudal system. They never had any concept of a country. Everything they did was for their own family. Nobles who lived on the border between two kingdoms were used to changing sides and pledging their loyalty to whoever was stronger. This was to ensure that their interests would not be harmed. When the old man heard this blatant statement of treason, he frowned subconsciously and asked in an uncertain tone, "Who is the enemy you mentioned? Or, have you been bribed by someone?" "The Lion of Orlos, the great Emperor Harrison. I don't know if this answer satisfies you." The nobleman pursed his lips with a smug smile on his face. "Emperor Harrison? He actually contacted you." A slightly younger noble beside him stood up abruptly and became very agitated. The nobleman nodded seriously. "That's right. The great Emperor Harrison believes that our arrogant queen should be taught a lesson. To be exact, she was not fit to sit on the throne and give orders, so she was ready to help the old king restore his throne. How about it? Are any of you interested in participating?" "Me? If Emperor Harrison is the initiator, I'm willing to go bankrupt for him. Count me in. For the kingdom ruled by the royal family and the nobles. Tell me, what should we do?" It had to be said that Harrison's reputation and political prestige, which he had built up over decades, were fully displayed at this moment. As soon as these nobles heard his name, it was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. They completely ignored the powerful army in Villia's hands. It was as if as long as they had the help of this legendary king, no matter how powerful their opponents were, they could easily defeat them. However, when they were discussing how to start a rebellion, overthrow the queen with Harrison's support, and restore the kingdom to its former glory, they did not realize that their every move was being monitored by magic. Villia stared at the virtual images and voices transmitted back from the magic mirror and couldn't help but mock. How disappointing. I thought they would come up with some interesting plans, but in the end, they were just used as cannon fodder. Don't let your guard down. Harrison was different from ordinary monarchs. The political influence and prestige he possessed was not something ordinary monarchs could compare to. Look at these people. As soon as they hear Harrison's name, it's as if they've changed into another person. Isolde stroked the beard on his chin and warned, "Understand, Harrison is indeed an outstanding king, even from the enemy's point of view. However, the problem is that times have changed. His methods of winning over the nobles are destined to be swept into the trash heap of history. However, having him as an opponent makes me feel more excited than ever before. I believe that as long as I defeat him, history will definitely give me, the queen who came to power through a coup, a very high evaluation, right?" As she said this, Villia's eyes shone with a fiery light. As the saying went, power could change a person's nature. Although she was not passionate about this before, now, she desired it more than anyone else. "Yes, you're right. Times have changed. Master has brought change to this world. He has brought a leap forward. Let's work together to create a glorious future. Orlas's great lion, Emperor Harrison, would be a good stepping stone. With that, Isolt waved his hand and turned off the magic mirror surveillance. With the kingdom's current military strength, a mere noble rebellion was not a big deal. What was truly worth paying attention to was how many trump cards this powerful king had. Then, how do you think I should deal with this rebellion? Destroy it with lightning speed? Or play a tug-of-war and slowly catch the hidden enemies behind it? Vilya asked with interest. The old man hesitated for a moment before suggesting, I don't think a noble rebellion will amount to much, so it's better to take it slow. Politics is an art of deception. You have to make the surrounding countries lower their guard. It's best to make them think that powerful weapons are difficult to produce and can't be used in every battle. That way, they won't band together to form a net. What about Kerwin? Is he also involved in this conspiracy against me? Vilya leaned forward slightly and asked the question she was most concerned about. Sorry, we've already fallen out. He won't reveal any secrets to me, so I can't be sure for now. However, if you show even the slightest bit of weakness, he'll take the opportunity to rush up and tear you to pieces. Remember, Master won't interfere with the struggles between servants. Theoretically, you and him both have a chance to get rid of each other. If that's the case, then let's see who will have a last laugh. Trust me, in the prelude of this new era, we will all play the most important roles. However, the prerequisite is that we cannot disobey Master's orders. Disobey orders? I've already seen Kerwin's fate. I won't do anything stupid. That's for the best. I don't want to change partners again. Chapter 1105. Master, this is the information you asked me to investigate on the Island Kingdom. I've collected and sorted it all out. Islands carefully placed a piece of paper filled with magical symbols on the table. His voice was so gentle, as if he was afraid of interrupting his master's train of thought. Well done. Zhang Cheng picked up the piece of paper and quickly retracted his attention from the depths of the vast universe. He gave it a cursory glance. Ever since his position was exposed, he could sense that there were a few pairs of eyes observing his every move in the dark. However, the problem was that the other party was too good at hiding. There was no way to track him. It was obvious that the rulers were trying to decipher his personality, behavior, and abilities through such observation. What was more interesting was that these fellows were not in cahoots. They were interfering with each other and setting up obstacles for each other. One of them even deliberately messed with the rules, making it more and more complicated and difficult to spy on him. Since the rulers were almost immortal, time was meaningless to them. Everyone was extraordinarily patient. They still had no intention of revealing themselves. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were cunning old foxes. Without a doubt, one of Zhang Cheng's specialties was to plot and scheme. However, in front of these bastards who carried out the strategy of hiding, all schemes were useless. Helplessly, he could only raise his guard in secret and carry out his plan in an orderly manner. He used the natives of this planet for experiments while cultivating the tree of chaos that continuously absorbed the planet's core energy. He did not believe that the rulers of the Order faction and the Neutral faction would be able to sit still after this planet was completely transformed into a chaotic planet. It should be known that spreading chaos was an irreversible process. A successful example meant that it could be replicated endlessly. When more than half of the planets in the universe were transformed into chaotic planets, order would naturally be compressed to the brink of collapse. This severely violated the ideals of the Order faction and also did not conform to the Neutral faction's view of maintaining the balance of the universe. To a certain extent, Zhang Cheng was provoking the bottom line of the other two factions at the same time. He was letting them know that he was a monster who did not consider the consequences when he went crazy. Only in this way would those powerful veteran rulers choose to restrain themselves and not take the initiative to find trouble with him. Using reckless actions to make the enemy cower in fear was undoubtedly a terrifying act. It was like the terrorists on Earth, who used suicide attacks and even directly slaughtered civilians to force the governments of various countries to back down. Especially in modern times, the Jews, who were the first to use terrorist attacks, successfully used this method to establish a country. One of the plotters eventually became the prime minister of the new country. Not only did he successfully clear his name, but he also didn't forget to smear the name of his opponent who tried to use the same method. In contrast, some other terrorist organizations that launched terrorist attacks were much more pitiful. Not only did they fail to achieve their goals, but they also became rats that everyone wanted to beat. The root of the problem wasn't that their methods were wrong, but that they didn't have the ability to continuously cause irreparable damage to the enemy. To put it simply, it didn't have enough deterrence. Think about it. If a certain big beard who was killed could continuously cause huge losses to those important cities and even assassinate and kidnap some important politicians and family members of financial groups, would there be any invasions later? The answer was 100% no. When you don't have enough strength to deter your enemies, yet you continue to provoke them verbally, this is undoubtedly the most stupid and idiotic behavior. However, Zhang Cheng was different. His philosophy was to speak less harshly and directly take things to the extreme. 100 verbal threats couldn't be more direct and leave a deeper impression than a single action. Islands obviously didn't know what his master was thinking. He continued to describe, "I found that after the civil war started in this country, all the residents became very strange. They didn't interact with each other, nor did they participate in any entertainment activities. Every day they just work, and work again, and then eat and sleep. I once tried to use this guy's magic to blend in, but I was immediately exposed." There's nothing to be surprised about. The residents of this country have been completely taken over by a parasitic creature. They can communicate with each other through their minds, so no disguise magic is effective. Zhang Cheng casually lit the paper and threw it into the air, letting it burn to ashes. Parasitic? Islands opened his eyes wide, revealing an expression of disbelief. Zhang Cheng nodded lightly. "That's right. If you kill one of the residents and then dissect his corpse, you will discover the secret hidden inside. But be careful. Once it burrows into your body, you will also be controlled." "Thank you for your reminder. I'll go catch one now to take a look." Allens didn't say anything else and immediately used a teleportation spell to disappear from where he was. Under the influence of the power of chaos, his actions began to become more and more chaotic. His sense of morality and responsibility was also quickly lost, and in its place was recklessness. After all, a few months ago, he was still a young man with a good heart. But now, he had become a demon who killed without batting an eyelid. It wasn't hard to tell from the piles of corpses in the basement that his soul had completely fallen. He even enjoyed the painful wails of the dead. Watching the test subject he created with his own hands leave, Zhang Cheng stood up from his chair and directly opened a teleportation door. He muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear, "While I still have some free time, I'd better relax a little and see how the game of Demon King and Hero has progressed. Let's hope that the chosen hero this time won't be a white-haired old man or a simple-minded brawny man." As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately went through the teleportation door and appeared in the wilderness about 10 kilometers away from the entrance of the underground ruins. Because of the skinning monsters, this place could be said to be littered with corpses. After walking for a short distance, he could see rotting and smelly corpses, as well as abandoned weapons and armor. From the beginning of the game until now, at least 300 adventurers had forever fallen in this dangerous land. Only a few had the chance to enter the depths of the tomb. Just as Zhang Cheng was about to change his appearance and body, he suddenly heard someone shouting, "Hey, wait!" He subconsciously turned around and saw a small group of 7 adventurers running towards him. The leader of the group was a tall and sturdy man. It wasn't difficult to tell from the colorful paint on his face that he was a barbarian warrior from the desolate mountains in the northwest. He carried a 1.5-meter-long, two-handed sword on his back. Chapter 1106. Looking at the agile warrior running towards him, Zhang Cheng immediately pretended to be confused and asked, "Are you calling me?" "Of course. You're the only one here." Who else could it be other than you? The strong man took off his helmet and wiped his forehead that was soaked with sweat. It had to be said that his physical fitness was really good. Even if he was doing strenuous exercise in such a hot and stuffy environment, he still didn't feel tired at all. Instead, he seemed to be full of energy. What's the matter? Zhang Cheng raised his head slightly, revealing his eyes hidden under the hood. Instantly, every member of the adventurer team was stunned. They couldn't describe how special those eyes were. It was as if a bottomless lake was about to suck them all in. Luckily, this state didn't last for too long. Soon, the barbarian warrior came back to his senses and shook his head hard. After a full minute, he asked with a vigilant face, "Damn it, what did you do to me just now?" "No, I didn't do anything. It's just that your spirit is too weak to withstand the energy that I unintentionally emitted. Remember, don't stare into my eyes. Otherwise, even your soul will be affected." Zhang Cheng tightened his hood again and explained in a half-serious manner. As his understanding of the rules deepened, the power in his body began to expand at an unprecedented speed. The most typical characteristic was that his eyes would release a little energy to the outside world. Perhaps in the vast and boundless universe, this slight release wouldn't even cause a splash. But for these mortals, even a little bit of contact was enough to cause extremely terrible and serious consequences. "Who are you?" A woman in the team who looked like a spellcaster, wearing a traveling robe, stood out very cautiously and probed. Unlike her companions who only knew how to use violence to solve problems, she could clearly feel the rich magical energy surrounding this mysterious person in front of her. She also understood that this person who had this kind of power was definitely not an ordinary adventurer. "Me? I'm just a traveler. I heard that there were ancient ruins here, so I came to see if there's anything I'm interested in." After saying that, Zhang Cheng turned his head and looked straight ahead. Just when the woman wanted to say something, a miserable cry faintly came from afar. "Ah, no, no, damn monster. Die. Kill, kill, kill. As long as I kill all of you, I will be able to survive." As the sound became clearer and clearer, a few figures soon appeared on the horizon. They seemed to have gone mad as they slaughtered each other with weapons in hand. The degree of brutality was simply shocking. Although the members of the adventurer team were still dumbfounded and didn't understand what had happened, Zhang Cheng saw everything that had just happened. Obviously, it was the Skinner's scheme in disguise that caused these people to fall into a state of frenzied suspicion and confusion. They believed that other than themselves, everyone else was a monster in human skin. But what they didn't know was that the Skinners were hiding in the dark and laughing at their stupidity. They were even betting on who would be the final winner. However, the final victor didn't manage to escape the danger, but instead became the Skinner's dinner. Cruel, brutal. They took pleasure in killing and toying with their prey. These were monsters that were created through the distortion of souls. Although they were very, very intelligent and could continuously obtain knowledge, memories, and various skills by devouring souls, they didn't have the slightest bit of respect or pity. They were clowns who liked to play pranks, sinister and cunning hunters, and even more so, vicious butchers. Even the creator, Zhang Cheng, didn't expect them to create their own unique social structure in such a short time and reproduce so quickly. Oh my God, what are those guys doing? Are they possessed? Or is it some kind of charm spell? An archer with a longbow on his back opened his mouth and couldn't help but exclaim, "No, it's not a spell. They aren't affected by any spell." The woman cast a detection spell and hurriedly shook her head to deny it. If it's not a spell, why are they killing each other like crazy? The barbarian subconsciously frowned. Because of his background, his knowledge of magic was limited to a few healing spells and some summoning spells. The woman rolled her eyes in annoyance. Who knows what's going on? Maybe they fought because they couldn't divide the loot evenly, or maybe they met some terrifying monster and had a mental breakdown. Don't forget, the person who sold us the information said that this place is very strange. Almost all the adventurers who came close didn't leave alive. Even if you manage to pull it out alive, you'll become paranoid or drown in fear, unable to extricate yourself. The archer quickly added, "Yes, look at the rotting corpses on the ground. There's definitely something wrong with this place. Let's go before those lunatics die. We'd better stop them and get some information." After saying that, the barbarian warrior didn't say anything else and rushed forward at an extremely fast speed. He waved his two-handed sword and knocked away the weapons of the barbarians. He used his fist to knock down the unlucky barbarians who didn't have much strength left. The whole process was very smooth, and the timing was just right. After he took out a hemp rope and tied the hands of the captives one by one, he opened the water bag and poured a little water on each of their faces. Unfortunately, these people were obviously exhausted. Not only did they not wake up, they closed their eyes and fell into a deep sleep. Their snoring could be heard clearly from dozens of meters away. "Damn it! Wake up! Wake up! If you want to sleep, you can sleep after you answer my questions." The barbarian grabbed one of the captives by the collar and shook him hard, trying to wake him up from his sleep. Unfortunately, it was all in vain. The exhaustion made the survivors sleep very soundly, and they weren't affected by the outside world at all. Helpless, he could only go back to Zhang Cheng and cautiously asked, "Do you have any way to wake them up?" "It's very simple. Let them drink this, and they'll wake up in at most a minute. But I have to remind you that this medicine has a fatal side effect, which is that it will seriously damage a person's mental state and even turn a person with a nervous breakdown into an idiot. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm not familiar with them. Their life and death have nothing to do with me. I just want to ask for some useful information." The barbarian grabbed the medicine and poured it into one of the captives without hesitation.